that before.
You better not be filming the city by the time you start talking. Back it out. Oh, yeah. That's true. I did criminal practice before. Oh, I was in Atlanta. Yeah. What part? Oh, you're old. Yeah. Yeah, that's a... Did you do a... Yeah, I speak really quickly too, and I often, especially when I'm nervous, I just want to get through what I'm trying to say, and it all just... I know. Because when I slow down, I lose my train of thought because I start thinking. That's a tough life. Oh my God. Okay, so then you start to get close. Yeah.
What? Oh.
Is that not my name tag?
I think. Yeah.
You can see well tonight.
That's my good eye. Yeah. Groups have longer than 10 minutes.
Some of them. Do you like some of their time?
Yeah, I don't know what I have no practice.
Yeah, I will probably.
All right.
That's what I expect. Oh, no, not really.
Should be coming.
Yeah, I mean, I got it last year, 2018.
Yeah, I didn't.
Right. So, yeah, it should be soon.
Yeah, I mean, it's
We have security and everything.
this is like
Yeah,
the final
it's up to
exam.
her. She's in charge of it for us.
You know?
Yeah.
I'm trying to put into practice everything I've learned. Like, let's see how I do.
Kathy.
Get to know you, so you said
How long? A couple hours.
Where's the pizza? Where's the pizza?
This is the night we need the margaritas.
my wife.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
This is the night we need the margaritas.
They were afraid.
It's special.
It's never been this way because of that. Yeah, I think it's really tough. This is like my final exam because I just everything that I've learned.
I had a semi-argument with her. When she was first just riding her bike around and introducing herself to people in the neighborhood. And she was like,
I know, it's exciting.
at my house, and she started talking about her plans, all these retention plans and stuff like that. I don't know. Did you run that right there in front of her?
Huh?
Who?
I don't know.
Okay, okay.
Why don't you check to that?
St. John.
He's in London. He can't.
St. John Group is management district,
So you work up to
South Florida.
Southwest. I'm always like,
If
Yeah.
I was in London, I'd be off the email. If I was in London, I
We
would.
do, work with both.
He always works.
Yes, I do.
are you civil engineer as well?
Yeah.
I knew that you're still
Yeah. I'm not that old yet. Almost there. Got some time.
Valerie.
The what? Who is it?
I still have daughter in college. Give me a football team. She wants a national. So I don't know how long that is.
One, two, three.
If I can have your attention, please, we'll call the meeting to order. May we have roll call, please?
Present tonight we have Kathy Moore, Tommy Minton, David Pollock, Kristen Swetland, Curtis Gashlin, and absent is Darrell Lopez and Lawrence Wright.
Thank you. If everyone would please check your cell phones and make sure they're turned off for the meeting. The first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the November 6, 2018 meeting. Do we have a motion to approve?
Madam Chair, I move to approve the minutes.
Mr. Minton, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Pollard? Is there any discussion?
Looks good.
Seeing none, we'll call the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The next item on the agenda is public comment time. And this is the time, there are two times during our meeting when the public gets to speak to the board. The first is during the public comment time, and the second is during the public hearing on the only other item that's on our agenda. During public comment time, this is the time for you to speak to us about something that's not on the agenda tonight, some other matter. If you're here about the one item for the special exception, then you would speak during the public hearing on that item. So given that, the speakers will be limited to 3 minutes during the public comment time and during the public hearing. Is there anyone wishing to speak to the board now during the public comment time about any other item? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. The next item on the agenda is the public hearing for resolution number 3680-19, special exception use order for the Black Hammock storage. May we hear from the city attorney first about our procedure for this?
Yes, ma'am. Good evening. This item is a quasi-judicial matter. It will be handled as such. The manner in which it will proceed is the item will be called up and it will be presented by the applicant. After that, staff will make a presentation. After that, testimony may be heard by others on behalf of the applicant or the opposition who have a legitimate interest in the matter, who can provide substantial competent evidence. Generally, there is no right to public comment. However, the applicant has agreed to allow it, and as the chairperson stated, there will be a 3-minute limit. Any decisions made by the board will be based on substantial competent evidence. After that, we will have rebuttal by the applicant, discussion, and then board action. At this time, if any board members have had any ex parte communications with anyone regarding this matter, I would ask that they please disclose the subject of the communication and the identity of the person with whom the communication took place. Did anyone have any ex parte communications with anyone regarding this?
Have any of you spoken to any of the members of the public?
Any citizens call you or send you a letter or an email, that type of thing? Okay. So any letters that you receive, you can disclose those as well as part of the record now. You all got letters, correct? You didn't get any letters? Aren't there some?
All I received was from staff.
Okay. All right. So can you just chairperson, could you disclose those as part of the record?
Yes, we received 2 letters from staff, and I'm looking for them here in my packet. One was from a Miss Ike, and the other was from the Homeowners Association for Southern Oaks.
And also on your days, you have one from Mr. Spear, I believe?
Yes, I did see one here.
Okay. Thank you. At this time, did anyone make any site visits or obtain any expert opinions as part of this matter as a board member?
No.
No? Thank you. Okay, that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. So may we hear from the applicant? State your name and address for the record.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the LPA. I'm Tom Sullivan with the Gray Robinson Law Firm, 301 East Pine Street in Orlando. I also have John Herbert, our civil engineer, here with me this evening. First, I'd just like to say we appreciate staff's recommendation for approval and agree with their report as well as the proposed development order with conditions, which I know we'll talk about in some detail tonight. Since I knew there'd be some folks here to speak about the request, I'd like to just go through the relatively short PowerPoint presentation to help illustrate why we think this request makes sense and is hopefully something that you can support. Just in terms of location, as you can see on this aerial, the property is kind of a little bit of a unique configuration, but it's on the east side of the intersection of DeLeon Street and Hammock Lane. This parcel map, apologize, it's a little bit small, but gives you a better feel, I think, for the property shape, its location in relation to State Road 434, and the other item I'd just flag here for your reference is the parcel to the east, which is a conservation tract that's adjacent to the property. So just to tell you a little bit, again, as I said, why we think this request makes some sense. First, it's compatible in terms of the existing land use and zoning designations that the property has. It's been designated as office commercial on the city's official zoning map since 2008. It's also had a future land use designation of office since 2008. And in terms of this request, and I won't go through the analysis in the staff report since I know everyone already has a copy of that, but the staff report goes through and applies the different criteria in the Land Development Code as it relates to the special exception and concludes that the project meets each of those items. So I wanted to note that here for the record. I know one of the concerns I've sort of heard just generally that folks have with this is one is related to traffic, which to be honest surprised me a little bit in that self-storage facilities are typically low traffic generators. The city, when we filed our application, had a third-party traffic consultant calculate based on the FAR for the property, which I think is just a 0.30, that the project would generate a total of 60 daily trips, and this is noted in the staff report as well, 4 a.m. peak hour trips, 6 p.m. peak hour trips, and that's less than, and you don't have to take my word for it, but it's recognized as being less than a number of other uses that are found as approved uses for the property. There's a detailed list in the staff report of all the uses that are approved, and by that I mean permitted, that wouldn't require a public hearing for a special exception approval, that somebody could go and essentially pull a permit for, and that includes adult family care home, a daycare center, a funeral home, assisted living facility, and both types of convenience stores that the city code defines, as well as some restaurants. So just in terms of process that, and where we are here before you tonight, we're here asking for your recommendation for approval for the special exception use for a self-storage facility. We know that we would have a number of additional steps along the way if we were to get past this initial step, in terms of a site development order approval from the city, a final engineering approval, as well as architectural development order, which I believe goes to the city council as well. I talked a little bit about traffic already in terms of uses that I've heard or issues rather, that I've heard as concerns. The other ones related to height, so I wanted to try to clear this up. We're proposing to limit the height for this facility to 2 stories or 35 feet. I believe that in the OC district you can have up to 60 feet. So that's not at all what we're looking to do. We're looking to have something here that's compatible with the surrounding uses, including the neighborhood. We're not trying to drop, an unattractive storage facility into this area. That's not at all what we're interested in doing. And I think part of the compatibility question does have to do with height, since that exact height we're proposing is really what, the same standard applies to the homes in the area. You can have a 2-story home up to 35 feet. In terms of lighting, and I'll sort of cover this a little bit now, we'd propose dark skies compliant lighting. We're not looking to have any light intrusion into adjacent properties. And honestly, when you look at, and this is covered in the buffers point I have here, I mentioned the parcel to the east. I mean, there's a whole parcel of property that we have no control over. It's already designated, I think, as conservation or a conservation easement. On the east side, we're proposing a minimum of a 40-foot building setback from the rear property line with a 30-foot landscape buffer as well. So we're trying to exceed your minimum criteria there. But I think one of the significant points that folks may not realize is that the development area we're proposing here is only on the southern portion of the property. It's which I think the property's 3.5 acres. We're proposing to develop on less than half of that. So it's the intensity is definitely limited. I think it's south of Hammock Lane, but I think when I was speaking with our civil engineer, I think it's a couple hundred feet actually south of Hammock Lane. So it's a good ways oriented down towards 434. So just this was really the last slide I had for you, and that is that, as I mentioned before, on the dark skies lighting, on the height conditions, we're willing to incorporate those, or would certainly be comfortable and would support incorporating those conditions. I listed those as 3F and 3G, just looking at the development order or the resolution. That seems to be the section that lists the conditions in there. The buffering is already listed in 3A. So With that said, be happy to answer any questions that you might have, and I know there's a lot of folks that want to weigh in on this and would certainly like to respond to comments at the end of that conversation.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the applicant?
I have a question.
Okay, Mr. Gashlin?
Retention pond, is there a proposed one on this site, or is there an existing one that's going to be utilized?
Let me, I'm always careful to just tell you what I know, what I don't know. So since I've got John here, our civil engineer, let me ask him to come up and answer that question to give you a straight answer on that. John, you want to?
You state your name and address for the record.
John Herbert, American Civil Engineering Company, 207 North Moss Road, Suite 211, Winter Springs 32708. There's currently no retention pond on the site, but we would be constructing one.
Does that require any mitigation? I only see where there's the proposed footprint and then wetlands.
Correct.
So
Correct.
where is the intention for, where would you plan on putting that? You looking at mitigation?
We are not going to encroach on the wetlands, so the wetlands would not have a mitigation issue. We would be providing a 25-foot buffer around the wetlands, and the retention pond would be between the building and the wetlands on the north side of the building.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions of the applicant?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Pollack?
First, hello. And I know it's probably not easy to give a presentation with a bunch of people looking at you.
Yeah, are they? I
They don't look
noticed
very
a couple
happy.
people back there.
I'm going to do my best to be nice. And I've spent a lot of time with staff. I've spent a lot of time making sure I understood all the aspects of this project to make sure that I'm fairly applying all the standards. Mm-hmm. So I've done my homework, so I just have some questions to kind of clarify, to fill in the gap, so to speak. The first question I have is, you're aware, and you alluded to that earlier, you're aware of the criteria necessary to establish the right for a special exception to be granted from the city.
Right.
The Land Development Code, I think it's 3.0, or sorry, 3.3. And so I have a couple questions for you about how the project satisfied those requirements. So I'm just going to go through a couple of those real quick. The first one being 3.3D1. It references the purpose and the intent, and whether or not, and I'll use the specific language, so I'm not paraphrasing, but whether or not the subject property would not adversely impact properties and land uses within the immediate vicinity. We've received a couple of letters that are in the record that we mentioned earlier, whether people are objecting to that and talking about how their properties would be adversely impacted. I was hoping you can speak to any research you're relying on to show that you have not, that this project will not adversely impact their properties.
Yeah, I guess what I would say there is I haven't. If you look at, again, I think you have to consider the property's existing land use entitlements. That it's an office comp plan designation, it's an OC zoning designation, and when you look at all the different uses that are already permitted, that I named a few of them, but there's a full listing in the report. The correspondence that I saw, which I imagine is the same that you did, I'm not sure, but I've staff forwarded me some of the correspondence, so we were aware of what was coming in. None of those really seem particular to me to a storage facility. As I mentioned, it compares favorably from a traffic generation standpoint in comparison with some of those other uses. And so to me, the property already has entitlements for certain non-residential uses, and I don't think that there's anything about this particular use that would cause any adverse impacts, and I didn't see anything in the way of evidence in that correspondence that listed that either. That's the best way I could try to answer that one.
As far as the zoning in this area is OC. OC
Yes, sir.
is neighborhood commercial retail. I think neighborhood commercial retail. How
That's
does...
not correct.
Oh, well, what is the... what's-
OC is office commercial.
Office commercial, sorry. Is neighborhood office commercial? Neighborhood being...
I haven't seen the word neighborhood used in there, but I believe it is OC, office commercial.
Right, in the code, it's listed as neighborhood office commercial. And I was just hoping how, if you can speak to how this storage facility would be consistent with a neighborhood office commercial use.
Well, honestly, I think the code already does that for us, with all due respect, simply because it's already listed as a use that's available by special exception, so it doesn't require rezoning. It's already listed in there as a use that's available by special exception.
Right.
So, and again, I think if you look at that use, particularly if you compared it with a daycare or a convenience store or something like that, I think it has more of a neighborhood feel, honestly. And I think that I want people to understand that we're not trying to drop something in here that's going to be disruptive to the neighborhood. I think, again, the height limitation, I think, is a relevant point to your question too. It's the same height as the height cap in those neighborhoods. So I don't know how it could be more compatible if it's literally matching that. And again, I think we're going to do our best when we go through the architectural process to, sort of further demonstrate that in terms of it being compatible.
Thank you. And I'm not trying to give you a hard time.
No,
These are the questions the public is interested in hearing the answers to, and so I'm
happy to answer. I'm happy to answer.
All right. Moving on to the second part of 3.3 D, it's D2, and those are the specific criteria that we referenced that the staff has issued us recommendations on. You'll see there's different criteria, land use compatibility. Talks about scale and intensity, traffic generation, wetland impacts. Familiar with what I'm talking about, right?
Yes.
Okay. In making this application, I've heard you reference the traffic considerations, and I understand what you're saying there. Regarding the scale and intensity, and this sort of goes to part 1 and part 2, but in scale and intensity, the city report or the staff report has noted that there's low density residential to the north, low density residential to the south, conservation to the east, and conservation to the west. What we're talking about here is putting in a 38,924 square foot storage facility. And the conclusion...
I'm sorry, Mr. Pollack, there's not conservation to the west.
That's what I'm looking at, right? I'm sorry, to the east. And to the west is low-density residential. Thank you for correcting me. I apologize.
Actually, what I have in says it's to the west, it's State Road 434 right-of-way.
And low-density residential?
Okay.
So my question is, and this is going back to originally where I talked about the adverse effect, or the adverse impact, how would that fit in? How is this compatible with the surrounding scale and intensity when we have low-density residential and conservation? How do you juxtapose that to storage?
Well, I think the first thing, again, is that it's already zoned OC. So we're not coming in asking to rezone the property. It already has an OC zoning designation, which allows for the FAR of 0.3. So we're not coming in here tonight asking the board, hey, we want to have more intensity than what could already go there in terms of the other uses that I mentioned that are already permitted. So I think it's already, if we were coming in and the piece was zoned residential or zoned ag or something like that and we were asking for it to be zoned OC, I could understand a little bit better where you're coming from. But as far as the scale and intensity, the scale of intensity is already permitted by right in the OC zoning designation that the property already has. And the other thing I would point out, because I flipped, as you were going through the criteria, I flipped to the page in the staff report that talks about the traffic impacts right after the scale and intensity, and I think you're using the term to juxtapose some things here. If you look at the prior 2008 approval, which on the first page of the staff report references that it was for a 23,895 square foot office complex. I think it had 5 different office buildings. That would generate, and this is, don't take my word for it, it's right in the staff report, that would generate approximately 263 daily trips, 37 a.m. peak hour trips, and 36 p.m. peak hour trips. By comparison, to juxtapose that with what we're proposing with a 38,925 foot storage facility, we're talking 60 trips, and that's roughly a fourth of the prior approval, and just really almost de minimis peak hour trips by comparison. So I think it, again, I just think it compares favorably with what was previously approved and other permitted uses that are there, and because the piece is already entitled for OC, it already has the scale and intensity approved in terms of the existing FAR.
Okay. Regarding the wetland impact, staff has made the conclusion that at the time of the order application, wetland boundaries will need to be clearly identified, but yet we were at this time able to conclude that there won't be an adverse wetland impact, and I'm wondering if you've done any studies at this point to identify the wetlands that are there and how we were able to conclude that the wetlands wouldn't be affected, or even where the wetlands are at this point.
Yeah, I think I might ask John to come up and help me with that one again, just because I don't want to misstate anything. But I know that when the office project from 2008 or so that I mentioned, when that was approved, that had to go through St. John's, had to go through the Water Management District permitting process, and I believe those approvals expired, but I don't think the wetland line really changed. So I think we need to go back in and sort of confirm all of that, but it's based on a prior delineation, so it's not something that we just sort of made up and pulled out of thin air or something like that.
Sure.
So it's and as John said, we're not proposing to impact any of the existing wetlands. So if we're not going to impact them, there's certainly not going to be an adverse impact to them if you're not developing anything within them, or I mean, it would all be subject to the city's criteria, St. John's criteria, like it would be for any other project.
Fair enough. I'm just asking for the purpose of.
That's the best I know. It's not an area that I'm particularly, an expert on, but that's the best way I can.
I'm asking just for the purpose of, obviously the burden of proof is on the applicant, and I think
right.
I just want to make sure that we're able to have the evidence we need by the relevant standard that.
Sure.
Do we have the information to actually make a determination on whether or not these criteria are satisfied?
Understand.
And the question I have is, has there been a study submitted with this special exception application that delineates where the wetlands are? Okay.
No, I don't believe so, John. I know that we submitted what staff determined to be sufficient, and applied the criteria that they did. But I don't believe there was a new study submitted.
Okay, so there's nothing submitted in associating with this application that would delineate where the wetlands are, or even state how the wetlands would be impacted, because we don't have a study of where even the wetlands
Well, what
are.
we've said on the record.
We have one previously,
we're
but in
not,
association with this application.
Right, but we've said on the record we're not going to impact them, regardless of exactly where they are.
Okay. Okay. So we're taking your word for it.
Well, why don't you?
I'm sorry, state your name again for the
John
record.
Herbert,
Thank you.
American Civil Engineering Company. We had a wetland consultant go out there and reflag the wetland. And then about 3 weeks ago, that consultant met with St. John's people on the site to confirm the location of the wetland. So we do have a survey of the wetland.
Okay, but nothing's been submitted. There's no report.
It has not been submitted, but I did use that information for the site plan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're almost done.
I got all night.
Are they paying you out? Regarding the criteria, we're talking about proper use of mitigative techniques. I think you've identified a willingness to go above and beyond to try to mitigate the impact that it's having to the community around it. I think you showed in your presentation how you're trying to limit the lighting, you're limiting the height, you're trying to have proper setbacks and use relevant conservation. I have a question, though, in the staff report, and maybe I can ask this to staff, but I don't know.
Sure.
If you're relying upon this, I want to ask you. It talks about the proposed development of the subject property in nearby residential use. It says the proposed development of the subject property is limited to that area south of Hammock Lane where there was previous development. Therefore, the proposed use does not have a direct impact to the houses within the Southern Oak subdivision. But I had a question about and I'm not sure who's going to speak and what neighborhoods they're from tonight. there's another subdivision that's actually a little bit closer than the Southern Oaks subdivision, and that one's directly adjacent to this, the property in question. And I know because at night when I'm driving down foot, and I didn't do a site, whatever, I just know because I drive that road. I've seen lights from those houses back there, so I know there's homes that are right behind that part. What mitigative techniques are you proposing to, I guess, keep that community from being impacted adversely?
Well, I guess if you could help me understand if we're looking at the property,
Sure. So if we're looking at
what side?
So if we're looking at Google Maps, all right, and to the east of where the host property is. There you go. So you see that neighborhood to the right? I believe that's Black Hammock Preserve. Yeah, Preserve Black Hammock. And that's right there to the north and to the east, directly, I guess, lining this entire project. And I guess I was wondering how those mitigative techniques would actually help those guys out.
Right. Well, I think at least I'd meant to cover that. I think the first thing is the piece there's a separate piece of property that we don't own, we don't control. That's immediately there to the east.
Is that the little carve out? Little chunk right there?
It's a little bit. Yeah, it's a little bit of an irregular shaped piece, sort of like this one. But that's already acts honestly as a buffer between this property and that property. I think it's designated conservation in the city.
What about to the south of that, where the peninsula kind of goes down, and directly behind those 6 or 7 houses that look like they're directly to the east of that project there?
Yeah, you're saying in an area that doesn't abut that parcel? I mean,
yeah, because I see the conservation you're talking about, that little chunk that's not part of the property. But if you go south of there, the stick part of the P, just to the right of that, there's I think I see 10 homes. Yeah, somebody's pointing out with a laser. It's a good thing there's no cats in here. But on that
Jump
part,
right up there.
but there's those houses there. I was wondering how these mitigative techniques would actually help those guys, because I see the reference to Southern Oaks, and that's why.
Yeah, I don't know honestly that it's different than any other of the homes to the east. You've got that piece in between, and then we also would be providing a landscape buffer as well. I think we haven't really. I think it'd be something we'd get into a little bit more in the final engineering phase, but in terms of how much of the existing landscaping that can actually remain. But to the extent that we can keep it there, we will. So I think it's a combination of the building setback and the landscape buffer.
And I asked that because, and this goes back to 3.31, where it talks about an adverse impact to the property and land uses within the immediate vicinity. We discussed, the densities and the traffic impact.
Right.
The question that I still have is those properties are legitimately in the immediate vicinity of this project. And I can't use my imagination and figure out how a 2-story storage facility would not adversely impact those properties. I think most people look out their back fence and expect to see neighbors or conservation or even a couple trees. Not nowadays, but used to. And I'm not sure how that doesn't adversely affect them, and I'm not sure what mitigative techniques we can employ, or even request that would protect those guys from having an adverse impact.
And I guess what I would say, in addition to what I've already said, in addition to what's detailed in the staff report, is that I don't know that the concern that you're bringing up, which I do understand, I don't know that concern is particular. In fact, I don't think it's particular to this use. I think you could say the same thing about other non-residential uses that are already permitted to go here. And so for that reason, I don't think it has, I don't think it fails to meet the criteria for that reason. If it's not specific to the use, you've already got non-residential uses, as I mentioned, that I think you could say the same thing about somebody looking out their window and seeing those without going through this process and getting additional mitigation included.
And I agree with that point. The part that I struggle with that is with your original zoning that you have from OC. I'm not arguing that. You don't have to ask us for permission.
Right.
But we have to give you permission to put this there. And so that puts an extra duty on us to determine on whether or not it's in the best interest.
Right. And that's what and I understand that. And that's what the mitigative techniques are. I mean, it's stuff that's above and beyond code that somebody could just go and pull a permit for and just meet the minimum. So that's why I think when you read the analysis under that section, it's doing things that are north of or greater than or in excess of the code requirements.
Yeah, and fair enough. And like I said before, I don't doubt your sincerity or your
No,
intent.
no,
here.
I appreciate
I just
that,
know that
yeah.
there's a lot of people who are here to speak tonight, and I know they
Right.
probably have concerns, and
Sure.
so I'm just trying to speak on their behalf. I got one last question for you, and then I'm done. I'm sure to everybody's delight. What are you relying on, I guess, if you had to, in summation, what are you relying on as support for your request? What evidence, I guess, is your best evidence that you're relying on
Sure.
in support of your special exception
Well, I
request?
think the first one would be the first thing I said essentially tonight is that your professional staff have gone through, received the application, had discussion with us about the application, applied the criteria that's in the code, applied the criteria that's in the comp plan, and looked at all the different requirements that the city has, went through the criteria that you and I just discussed in detail, and concluded in their professional opinion that all those criteria are met, and that's why they're recommending approval. And that is certainly considered competent substantial evidence when your professional staff makes a recommendation. I also think you've heard from our licensed civil engineer in terms of his testimony about some of the wetland flagging and things like that. So we have some professional testimony as well. And that's really, I think, the best answer to the evidence question.
So outside of the staff report, because I believe we have the full record in front of us at this point, there has been no, and as I mentioned before, we don't have any specific surveys, reports, anything compiled by any professionals at this point, and other than the staff recommendation today, at this juncture.
Well, we submitted the full package that you see included in there, which is includes concept plans, things like that were prepared by professionals. And that was all done, by the way, and I think this is important, in order to make a submittal to the city that was sufficient, that complied with the criteria, complied with the submittal criteria. We don't make that up. The city application says, here's what you need to prepare and submit in order for us to process your application, and that was not only deemed sufficient by staff, but was recommended for approval. So that's the standard that we were applying, and I think like any other applicant that would come along would be subject to the same standard.
Okay. One last question. If you had to choose between retail or a storage unit in your backyard, which one would you pick? You don't have to answer. I'm just kidding. Don't answer. Don't answer. Don't answer. You really don't.
Okay. I won't answer it then.
I'm done with this witness.
Are there any other questions?
I have two questions.
Ms. Wetland?
Thank you. Thank you.
Has the applicant considered any types of screen walls that would be part of the landscape buffer on? Oh, I'm sorry. Has the applicant considered any screen walls that would be part of the landscape buffer? That's not, I mean, I understand that we're not going to make a 30-foot wall, besides the building, but to prevent people to actually going back and forth through the conservation area into the residential areas, is my thoughts.
Yeah, we're not opposed to it. To answer your question, I think it depends sort of what you use in terms of the buffer, whether you can maintain a bunch of the existing vegetation, which I think would act as kind of a natural barrier and visual screen, or whether you want to have some construction activity in that area in order to install the wall. But it's something that the type of buffering and those sort of things, we're flexible on that. So I don't want to represent to you that we said, hey, yeah, we'll there was something specific that we had thought about proposing for that, but it's not something that we certainly would consider it if you all thought it was appropriate to consider.
Okay.
So I think the other part of it is the like I mentioned, and it's referenced in the mitigative techniques and stuff like that in here, is doing greater than the buffers in excess of what the standards would be to try to address that as well. So I think you can kind of do it in a couple. There's a few different ways to try to accommodate that concern.
So my next question is that this property is along State Road 434, and if a pond is needed, which it sounds like from the civil engineer that there is a pond that's needed, will the pond need to be fenced based on the fact that it's on a state road, as FDOT ponds have to be fenced?
That's I don't know. John, do you know? I don't want to answer. I honestly don't know the answer to the question. Yeah.
Madam Chair, the code doesn't, the city code encourages curvilinear ponds that are at the appropriate slope so that they do not need to be fenced. The code encourages not fencing ponds on private property.
Thank you. Are there
So
any?
it won't be fenced?
We typically don't ask or require them to be fenced.
Okay.
Mr. Vinton, do you have questions of the applicant?
Yes, and mine will be much shorter. First question, and this may be a little bit of putting the cart before the horse, but is the intention to allow 24-hour access similar to what other self-storage facilities do allow?
I think so. Well,
We need to have quiet in the chambers, please.
yeah, I haven't heard, and let me answer that a little bit better. I've never been told by our client that they were looking to limit the hours. I mean, I think that there's so few trips that we talked about that they're sort of distributed throughout the day. I don't think there's going to be a lot of trips in the evening hours. But I haven't heard it being different in terms of the hours of operation than other similar uses.
Like I said,
Okay.
it's a little bit of cart before the horse, but I'm just trying to get an idea.
Gotcha. No, I appreciate the
or not.
question. I hadn't considered it that much. It just because it hadn't come up, I'm assuming it would be the standard in that regard in terms of the hours.
Okay. And the second question, in all honesty, I don't know if it's appropriate to ask, so I'll allow the city attorney to stop me if need be, or if you choose not to answer. Because you have brought up the previous plans that have been approved in 2008 and the fact that that is in our packet, it brings me to the question of asking why are we proposing, or why you are proposing the change from those plans to this, which is something different and needing this exception order. I mean, what is the kind of the impetus behind
well, I think,
wanting to shift
sure.
directions on this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the direction, I think those approvals are fairly old at this point. But I think it's just a demand for the use at this location. I think it's perceived as a use that there's more of a need for right now in today's market than a traditional office use.
Okay, thank you. I'm done.
Sure.
Any other questions of the applicant? Thank you, Mr.
All right.
Sullivan.
Thank you.
May we hear from staff?
Good evening, Madam Chair, board members. As Mr. Sullivan mentioned, this is a request for the local planning agency to consider and make a recommendation for the resolution number 3680-19 for special exception use order number 202-19 for the Black Hammock self-storage facility, which is a personal storage mini warehouse use. The property is approximately 3.35 acres in size and is generally located on the east side of the intersection of De Leon Street and Hammock Lane, as noted in attachment 1. Just as a bit of background, on October 6, 2008, City Council adopted Ordinance 1444 to change the future land use map designation from low-density residential to office, and also adopted Ordinance number 1445 to change the official zoning map on the property from agriculture to office commercial. On February 1st, 2010, the City Council approved resolution number 2119, which approved their master land use plan and non-statutory development agreement for the Black Hammock Village, which is a 23,895 square foot office complex. This master land use plan and agreement included standards for a 25-foot conservation area easement at the rear of the property, but a 0 building setback. And as you can see in the site plan, the buildings were going to go right up to this 25-foot setback for conservation. The site plan and development order for the Black Hammock Office Village included 5 office buildings, was approved on December 3rd, 2010. It had an expiration date of December 3rd, 2011. There was no activity. The applicant's property owners requested 3 extensions in total. The first extension was to extend it from December 3rd, 2011 to December 3rd, 2013. With no further activity, the second extension was to 2014, and then the third one to 2015. and there has been no activity on the site, so all of these previous approvals, as well as the non-statutory development agreement, have expired. The code in section 3.34, D4B states that the LPA will review the application for a special exception use order and recommendations of the land use administrator, and they shall make a written recommendation to City Council to approve with revisions, or deny the proposed special exception use order, with the explanation, citing the explanation for the denial. The special exception use order would only shall be permitted only with the approval of City Council. So this body makes a recommendation. The City Council has final approval authority. Table 4.1 in Article 4, Section 4.10 provides a list of the permissible and prohibited uses, as well as those uses that are permitted through a special exception use order. For Table 4.1, I'd like to just call out the list of uses that are currently allowed by right. Those uses include adult family care home, professional office, business office, a bank with no drive-through, personal services such as salons, daycare, barbershops, things of that nature, daycare centers, a repair shop with no trucks or outdoor storage, restaurants with no drive-throughs, funeral homes, assisted living facilities, commercial, community residential homes, specialty shops, retail sales, convenience stores, type 1 and type 2. Type 2 is the type with gas stations, pet care services, elementary, middle, and high schools, churches, synagogues, temples, and other institutional uses, libraries, art museums, etc., social and fraternity clubs and lodges, and recreational facilities that are publicly owned. Other uses that would be allowed through a special exception include medical clinics or hospitals, alcoholic beverage package stores, dry cleaners and laundromats, personal storage warehouses, veterinary offices with no kennels, trade and vocational schools, cemeteries, and privately owned recreational facilities. Per this table, the special exception use order is coming before this body to, as a special exception use request. The special exception use order number 202-19 will allow for the use of the personal storage and will ensure that the use will only be permitted on the property and will not adversely impact properties and adjacent land uses within the immediate facility. The preliminary site plan that was included as attachment 2 of the board's packet is conceptual in nature. This body would not be approving that preliminary site plan with the approval of this special exception use order. They would have to come through the city staff, the city, all of the departments for review of the site development order and final engineering, as well as the architectural. I'd like to go into the details of the criteria that's established in the code for the review of special exception use orders. There are 7 of them. The first one is land use compatibility, where the applicant has to demonstrate that the proposed use, its scale and intensity, traffic, and offsite impacts are compatible with the adjacent land uses, and that it would not adversely impact land uses in the vicinity. In terms of scale and intensity, as Mr. Sullivan mentioned, the area is surrounded by, in terms of future land use, low-density residential to the north and south, conservation to the east, and State Road 434 and low-density residential to the west, west and northwest. The zoning districts to the north is R1 and R2 is in the south, R1 conservation tract to the east, and the road and R1 to the west. In terms of traffic generation characteristics, this post-development would generate approximately 60 daily trips, 4 a.m. peak hour trips, and 6 p.m. peak hour trips. Based on our traffic consultant's review, the anticipated trips are negligible and do not warrant either a full or an abbreviated traffic impact analysis. And for those in the audience, an abbreviated traffic impact analysis would be an analysis looking at specific intersections. So our traffic consultant has identified that this trip generation rate would not even warrant an analysis of the intersections. In terms of the wetlands, the preliminary site plan is conceptual. When we look at the site development order, we will verify the wetland boundaries with St. John, and we will make sure that the impacts, that the project will not encroach upon the wetland boundaries. That is also not only a requirement of the Land Development Code, but also a policy in the comprehensive plan. The second criteria that staff is required to review based on the code is that the site is of a sufficient size to adequately provide the needed on-site infrastructure. So when we review applications for site development approvals, everything on that for that development has to be self-sufficient and self-supporting. So in terms of the size and shape, whether or not they can provide the screening materials on site, the parking, the internal circulation, pedestrian accessibility, ingress, egress, landscape buffering, drainage, parking, all those things that we typically look at in a site plan review. We generally look at those things as part of a preliminary look at the conceptual site plan. And based on the size that they're proposing and the acreage, they are proposing to have approximately 24.4% of impervious surface area. So less than a quarter of the site would have impervious surface area. With that, staff determined that the proposed use would have, that the site would have sufficient size to accommodate the requirements of the code for parking and other things. The third item that we look at is the proper use of mitigative techniques. The applicant shall demonstrate that the special exception use has been designed to incorporate mitigative techniques needed to prevent adverse impacts to adjacent land uses. Design scheme shall address offsite impacts. Community infrastructure will not be burdened, and wetland impacts would not occur, and that there would not be any adverse or detrimental impact to the general public health, welfare, and safety. Staff's analysis found that the front, which is the northwest side, the west and northwest side of the project faces single-family homes to the northwest area and State Road 434 to the immediate west area, as well as De Leon Street. So you have two rights-of-ways, De Leon Street, and then a stormwater pond, and then State Road 434, which I believe has over 100 feet of right-of-way. To the rear or the east side of the property line abuts a conservation easement, which is, I believe, approximately 60 feet, looking at the previous Black Hammock office development. And then on the other side of the Sweetwater Creek Conservation Area is single-family homes. And the requirements from the code for the minimum front and rear building setbacks are 25 feet. In the front and 20 feet in the rear. The minimum landscape buffer requirements along De Leon Street is 10 feet, which is a type A1 landscape buffer, and there are no buffer requirements between the proposed use and the conservation area required in the code. Between the subject property and the houses within the, I mentioned that there's the landscape tract. Because this is a special exception use order, the city has the opportunity to require mitigative techniques, and the mitigation options that staff had talked with the applicant about include, I'll just refer to the site, the SDO, 40 foot of rear building setback, so the requirement is 20. They are providing 40. They're proposing a 30-foot rear landscape buffer, and earlier this afternoon they were willing to consider a type C2, which is the most intense landscape buffer that the city code requires, and that is a 30-foot landscape buffer composition with 3 feet of, 3 large trees per 100 linear feet plus 3 medium or small trees per 100 linear feet, so approximately 6 trees per 100 linear feet. The code requires 0. The applicant is willing to commit to 30 with a type C2. I think there was a conversation about the property to the south that is part of the Laurel Oaks subdivision. I looked at the plat this morning. That tract A is a somewhat of a conservation area. It's to be preserved the way it is. It's several hundred feet between this property line and the first residential lot south of that. The fourth criteria that staff analyzes is hazardous waste. The proposed use is not anticipated to produce hazardous waste on the site. The site plan, when it comes in, will be required to provide a note on the site plan that no hazardous waste materials, or hazardous materials will be generated, stored, or disposed on the subject property. The fifth review is compliance with applicable laws and ordinances. They will be required to comply with all federal, state, county, and city laws and ordinances. The sixth criteria is for special exception use orders for commercial uses within residential districts. This criteria doesn't apply to this site because the property is not residentially zoned. This would apply to like an R2 zoning category where someone wanted to put in a bed and breakfast. So that would be a commercial use in a residential zoning district, and we have more specific criteria that we would look at, but that criteria does not apply to this site. The seventh criteria is basically additional criteria applicable to the specific land use if the land use administrator required any additional information, they would be obligated to provide that information. And we have been talking with the applicant over a period of days, and they provided us everything that we've asked for. The city attorney has reviewed resolution number 3680-19 and found no legal objections. The proposed special exception use order must undergo 2 public hearings. This is the first of those 2 public hearings, and it is tentatively scheduled to go to City Council for a public hearing on January 7th, 2019. With that, before I go to the recommendations, I do want to point out a couple of things. Mr. Sullivan mentioned that the 60-foot height limitation is for the OC district. That is not accurate. The 60-foot is for any properties that is along a development corridor in the city, and that includes State Road 434, Mitchell Hammock, and some others like 419 that are major arterials in the city limits. There was something else that I think that's it. Mr. Gaston had asked about the on-site retention. The site plan that they provided shows the preliminary site plan shows the location of the stormwater facility. It's right here, right at the northeastern corner of the proposed building. And then just as for information, this is a 2-story building. The maximum size is not set in the code. It is something that is set in the comprehensive plan, and that is 0.3 FAR, meaning it's a floor area ratio of 0.3. The applicant cannot exceed that requirement because the city does not allow any deviations to the comprehensive plan policies. The building footprint is approximately 19,000 square feet. So staff believes that they have a pretty small footprint for the 3.35 acre site. And with that, staff recommends approval of resolution number 3680-19, which approves special exception use order 202-19 to allow the use of
the site for personal storage mini warehouse use. There are no budgetary impacts anticipated with the approval of this resolution. The proposed office warehouse use is consistent with the city's goal for economic and vitality focus area, which is out of the city's sustainability plan. And staff recommends that the LPA conduct a public hearing and recommend to City Council adoption of resolution number 3680-19. With that, I am available for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions of staff at this point? Seeing none, we'll open.
I have a question. I was just giving people time.
Mr. Pollack?
These are going to be quick. When we talked about the OC zoning, we talked about how it's, I think the term was low intensity neighborhood office commercial, something like that. Correct me where I'm misstating. I don't have the code in front of me on that particular matter. I can pull it up. When we talked about, Tommy mentioned to the applicant about the hours of the storage facility being possibly 24 hours. We don't know yet, but assuming that a storage facility does have 24-hour access, how is that consistent with OC, where we have office commercial that are like office commercial, like retail uses and the uses that you've listed here? Those usually aren't open 24 hours. How is the storage and the 24-hour storage consistent?
I don't. The city's code doesn't, staff doesn't have the authority through the code to regulate the hours of operation for a business. I don't think that we've even asked or addressed that as yet. I have the code here and I can read it for the benefit of the audience.
Thank you.
It is under section 4.4, parens B, which states neighborhood commercial and office districts. The office commercial OC district is a neighborhood commercial and office district designed to accommodate low-intensity commercial uses, which staff believes this is, and with limited traffic generation impacts and movements, which at 6 p.m. peak hour trips, it's very comparable to a couple of single-family homes. So that's the definition. In terms of the hours of operation, if the board feels strongly that is a big concern that the communities might want, you could have the option of recommending approval, but convenience stores, which are allowed by right, like 7-Eleven and other places, they are allowed, they are 24/7. So they could be, I'm sorry, not 24/7, 24 hours. So that's something that we could discuss with them. But a convenience store, 7-Eleven, could go there now, and they are 24 hours.
What is the definition of low intensity? I think that's what you read from the code. Is that what you said for the neighborhood office commercial?
They're typically small in size. They don't generate a great demand on public services and public infrastructure. There's not a lot of traffic going to it. It's low intensity means it's actually established that in the comp plan for 0.3 FAR that less than, well, about a third of the site can be built. And they're proposing to build on approximately 24.5% of the site.
Okay, thank you. One last question. Regarding the findings, and I asked this of the applicant, in making some of these determinations for the criteria for the special exceptions, and I know I referenced the wetlands quite a bit, and has staff had conducted any wetland studies or received from the applicant anything that would, I guess, support the conclusion of the wetland impact at this time?
So just to clarify, we have a site plan. There is just a conceptual site plan, so staff has not reviewed the site plan. But the site plan shows a wetland. So there is a wetland. There was flagged before that is shown in our site plan, conceptual site plan, and the building. And we have the comprehensive plan and the LDC has significant wetland buffers requirements. So that will be enforced, and it's a minimum of 50 feet, average 50 feet, minimum 25. So this will be enforced when the wetland is finally flagged, because they probably used the wetland from the previous project, and they will have to now reflag the wetland. I think we heard the engineer saying that they did that recently. So it's not that wetland has never been considered. They are saying that they will not impact the wetland. The wetland is shown in our the conceptual site plan that they approved, that they submitted to us. But we haven't reviewed it yet. This is going to be part of the engineering review.
Then I guess my question is, how can we today agree with the finding about the wetland impact when we don't yet know what the impact would be? How can we conclude that it's no impact, or the impact is limited based on what we will do to protect the wetland? We don't know what the wetland is. The whole thing could be a wetland for all we know.
Well, the LDC allows mitigation to wetlands. It's an expensive process, right? And it also preserves wetlands that are flagged. So if you have a wetland, you have to preserve it, right, or mitigate it and go through St. John's, right? So we don't control that process. That is a process that St. John's controls, and we have our own regulations that, if you have a wetland and St. John's flags a wetland, our buffers would apply.
But how are we able to determine right now that about the wetland impact?
Because the LDC does not allow us to have wetland mitigation or to have wetland impacts that are not mitigated or preserved. So if you have a wetland, either you preserve the wetland with the buffers or you mitigate through St. John's. And then mitigating, you're going to impact the wetland, but you have to buy credit. So there is a whole process for that.
Okay. And then one last question regarding, and this is just for my education, LDC section 3.3D1, the way it sits separately from 3.3D2. In 3.3D1, it sets forth sort of a general standard, the not adversely impacting properties and land uses within the immediate vicinity. Is it like a two-part test? Like you have to satisfy one before you can satisfy? How does one?
So one is the intent, right? It's the purpose and intent. And the LDC gives the criteria to meet the intent. So the intent is provided by one, and Section 2 provides the criteria. So that's why we, in our staff report, we describe the criteria and how we evaluate the criteria.
So the criteria set forth in 3.3D2 defines whether or not there's an adverse impact on properties and land uses within the immediate vicinity?
Yeah.
I believe that's all the questions I have for you. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Teresa, can you stay?
Sure.
Mr. Minton?
Thank you. Since you brought back up the question of the 24-hour access, the reason I asked that question wasn't actually really the traffic. I mean, I fully understand and would probably agree with that the traffic is going to be less for a storage facility than an office complex is going to have in and out. My concern more with the 24-hour question was a part of Section 3.3D2A on land use compatibility that was not included on the staff memo on page 3, but is in the article itself. One of the questions is compliance with sound.
Compliance with?
Blah, 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 blah. So the compliance with sound was really more my question with a storage unit being 24-hour access, having trucks that are going to be sitting there during that nighttime, I'm just thinking, U-Hauls, Ryder trucks, these big things coming in there, beep, 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 the sound of it running because somebody may just be trying to get in there, backing in and out and all that stuff. That was my question more about the 24-hour access, and wasn't the traffic, it was that. And because it wasn't specifically addressed in our memo, but is in the code itself, was why I asked the question. And so when we look at the staff memo under A3, offsite impacts, we say it's low intensity use. Okay, agreed, I concede that. Not anticipated to result in adverse offsite impacts. That's my question there. Have we actually addressed that? And when I asked the applicant, he did say, thinks it probably will be because most storage units are, but wasn't sure, so has that been addressed? The hours that it's going to be open and that sound impact middle of the night. Has that been addressed?
I don't think we went to that detail with the hours of operation. That can be a compromise, and I will let the applicant speak on that, respect, but that could be, but as described by Ms. Whitfield, Some by right uses could also be 24 hours. So that's, you have to consider that too.
Correct, and I would see that. I'm just thinking more from the sound capability that a car driving into a convenience store, parking, going inside isn't going to have the impact of a large truck trying to back down that extension of De Leon Street that's already not the code. It's not a real
Well, the
street
other thing
anymore.
of backing up, the design of, again, we haven't checked the design yet of the
Right.
site
But just
plan.
looking at the way
But
the
the
site-
site plan doesn't seem to have a backup. It has to have, it's a one-way.
Sure, somebody who knows how to drive those trucks, I would agree, but the average person going to
Yeah.
the storage unit isn't
Well,
going to...
what I'm saying with design, we can also address that.
Well,
But-
that was my question. I questioned if that was addressed, and when asking the applicant, it didn't seem like that. It was a question that had been asked and come up, so...
And if I can just add to that respect, I think the beautiful thing about special exception use order is that you can provide additional mitigation, right? Of right, by right uses, and those are all the listed uses in OC, if an applicant comes with a project, it will not come to the boards. It's going to be staff approval. So all the setbacks, all the, the additional setbacks, buffers, design requirements, that's something that can be addressed at this stage and can be included in the special exception use order.
Okay, good to know. My second question, again to the staff memo, looking on page 5, part D about the hazardous waste. It mentions in the analysis, and I'll quote, "The site plan shall include a note which ensures that no hazardous waste or hazardous materials shall be generated, stored," and I'm going to put the emphasis on that, "or disposed on the subject property." Given that this is going to be a self-storage facility, I can see where the owner, the applicant themselves, aren't going to be storing everything, but who's going to ensure that the customers renting the space at the storage facility will not be storing hazardous materials there? Whose responsibility is that going to be?
Would the applicant like to respond to that? Because we don't have in the LDC anything, I mean, with the site plan, what I can say, if the site plan has that requirement, we can code enforce if we find,
Okay,
that
so-
it's disrespecting the site plan, but we don't have a way to if it's a requirement of an approval, if it's an approval, that if they disrespect that, we can code enforce. That's the way.
Because I guess that's part of the question, is who's going to ensure that the customer is not storing the hazardous materials, and will that be explicitly written into the site plan to say whose responsibility that will be? Because, I mean, I've had rented storage spaces out, nobody's going in there but me, I have the lock. I've signed a piece of paper that says, yeah, I'm not storing anything here. I could be. There's nobody on that site that's going to have access to that unit to know unless something goes wrong, obviously. So a concern here that we're saying proposed use is not anticipated to produce hazardous waste, agreed. They're not producing the waste, but the question of the storage, when we're talking about customers, and I'm only asking because it clearly states here, the site plan shall include a note which ensures this. So I'm wondering how in this note it's going to say who is ensuring it, how are we guaranteeing it's not happening, and will it be explicitly written in there?
Well, again, on our side, if the site plan has that note, we can code enforce, right? If there is any proof that they are not respecting the condition of the approval. But I'll let the applicant, if he wants to add anything on that respect.
I'll just add a little bit to what Dr. Correa said. I mean, the owner, I guess 2 points. One, the owner is ultimately responsible because the condition and the note that you're referring to is going to sort of encumber the property and then would make the property subject, as she said, to a code violation, which could result in fines and all sorts of things. So there's an obligation on the part of the owner. But having said that, I don't, because I don't think it would be an issue. No one's looking to attract people that are trying to store hazardous waste or hazardous materials on the property. I'm sure that we could add a condition to any of the rental agreements that would restrict it to, just as kind of a belt and suspenders. But beyond that, I don't know what else I could add.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
That's my questions. Madam Chair, has more questions.
Madam Chair, I have one follow-up question for city staff.
Mr. Pollak?
Sure. Oh, okay. I know I mentioned to you about part 1 of 3.3D1. We talked about how 3.3D2 sort of sets up 3.3D1. But I have a question about 3.3D2A, where it talks specifically about land use compatibility. It sort of mirrors the intent language. It says the applicant shall demonstrate that special exception use, including its proposed scale and intensity, traffic generation characteristics, and offset impacts are compatible with adjacent land uses and will not adversely impact land use activities in the immediate vicinity. Regarding the land use compatibility standard, I understand the traffic impact. That I'm not questioning. But what factors does staff look at to determine the adverse impact to land use activities in the immediate vicinity? And again, I want to point out, the land use activities in the immediate vicinity are either conservation or low-density residential. So how is this compatible? I guess that's my question as far as part A.
Well, we have to prove it's not compatible, right? So compatibility, the impact of the traffic, which is less than what was approved before and less than most of the uses by right, it's an easy one, right? It's a very low traffic generator.
The traffic one I'm square on.
The scale, the intensity is established by the comprehensive plan, right? They're meeting the scale, and that's the scale for any use in that property. So they are not changing, they are not intensifying the use. It's the same use that would be, the same intensity that any other use that is in OC would have. They are decreasing the scale because in that particular property, because it's in a development corridor, we would allow a 60-foot building, foot-high building, right, in height. They are proposing two-story, a maximum of 35 height. That is the same of a house, of a two-story home. That's the requirement, the height requirement for a home. So the scale is smaller than what would be allowed.
Yeah, no, I understand.
And the use, there is nothing in the, because the storage does not have vibrancy, right? So it's a less impact to the neighbors than a daycare, than a busy restaurant. So that was the reason why staff felt that this particular use is compatible with the OC, with the definition of OC.
So
now the character, just to finish, the character can be addressed with the architectural design standards. If people are afraid that this will have an industrial look, this is something that with the architectural standards we will address, right? Because this building will go through an architectural design order. It's going to be approved by City Council. And if there is also a compromise on specific design standards that the community would like to see or the board would like to see, that is something that can be also addressed in the special exception use order.
And I apologize for interrupting. I just feel like everyone's sick of hearing me at this point. The question I have, so when I read, and I ask because I know you know this stuff, in land use compatibility, I'm reading it like this. I'm reading it, the application shall demonstrate that special exception use, and then it says including, and it kind of goes and lists different things. Its proposed scale and intensity, comma, traffic generating characteristics, comma, and offset impacts are compatible with adjacent land uses, and you've addressed that. Then it says and will not adversely impact land use activities in the immediate vicinity. So I'm reading these as separate sort of criteria that goes into whether or not the land use is compatible. I understand the traffic part. I understand the scale and intensity. Makes perfect sense. Thank you for your explanation. The characteristics makes perfect sense. The thing I'm still, I guess I'm seeking clarification on, the conclusion that it will not adversely impact land use activities in the immediate vicinity as a separate criteria. How do we determine that?
Well, how can I say it impacts if it's a building that most of the time nothing happens, right? There is no noise being generated in the building. There is no fumes. There is no So these are the compatibility, right?
But what about how the people who live in the immediate vicinity feel about it? Is that a factor of the impact?
Dr. Correa, if I could, when we review deviation applications, one of the criteria that we look at is whether or not that person's request for a deviation, whether it's for a shed or some other accessory structure or setback deviations, we analyze the application request based on whether or not, and to quote that, it adversely impacts adjacent vicinities. And we've always applied that whether or not the impact would prevent the other person from the enjoyment or the use of their property. The staff feels that the proposed self-storage facility, which has minimal impacts to traffic and is not going to encroach upon or adversely impact wetlands, the applicants agreed to provide greater than 100% of the setback for buildings, buffer requirements, parking is minimal. The construction of this storage facility or the approval of this use isn't going to prevent other adjacent property owners from using their properties or enjoying their properties. That is typically when I and my staff review deviations, that's what we look at, is whether or not that request is going to impede upon another property owner's right and ability to enjoy their property.
And that's what I want to challenge you a bit on, because how are we, from an evidentiary standpoint, how are we arriving at those conclusions that it will not adversely affect the enjoyment or use of the adjacent properties?
If they can get in and out of their homes, if they can utilize their properties, if they can go in the back and sit at the pool, if they can invite friends over, and we're speaking residential, or there's a commercial site. And I do want to point out that there is commercial designation, commercially zoned properties, approximately 1,000 feet from this site, both on the east and the west sides of 434. And there is commercial in the Winter Springs and unincorporated Seminole County area further westward from the site. And this road is, it is a development corridor. The comprehensive plan encourages and promotes more non-residential growth. Right now, we're not quite meeting the policy's goal of having more non-residential along this corridor, and there's commercial within 1,000 feet of the site. So this project or the approval of this use, not the site plan, isn't going to prevent adjacent property owners the ability to build on their site, add to their homes, invite friends over, have a pool party, go in and out of their homes, run errands, or any of those things. That's when I look at deviations, that's what we look for. Is what someone's asking for going to prevent someone else from being able to utilize their property?
Okay, thank you.
Well, it's the intensity and the nuisance that it may create, right? That would be something that would impact. So if you have a kennel there, people may complain that, there is noise, there are smells that, so these are the considerations that we take. And in the storage, there is not much going on inside, so it's more of an issue of the character of the appearance. And this site is proposing enough buffer, an additional setback that the previous office did not have, and now they are proposing the limitation of the height. And we can hear from the residents and see what are the other concerns that they have.
May I also add, in the comp plan, just so that everyone knows, there are categories for future land use designations. It goes from rural to low density residential to medium density residential. Then the non-residential parts is office, commercial, high intensity commercial, planned unit developments. The office designation of floor area ratio of 0.3 is the absolute lowest floor area ratio established in the city's comprehensive plan. So they're staying to that. So I just wanted to point that out. That is the lowest FAR in the city.
Thank you. Mrs. Swetland or Mr. Gashlin, do you have any questions of staff?
No.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll open it up for a public hearing at this time.
Madam Chair, if I may interrupt, we've already been out this almost an hour and a half. I would suggest a brief recess before we begin that part to ensure that we have all the written forms from everybody who does wish to speak before we tackle that part.
Okay, we'll take a 5-minute recess.
The only one here, huh? Yeah. Yeah, back. Yeah. Well, yeah, I've aged if you have to wonder. Hey, maybe. That's up in Virginia. He's from Lake Mary. Seen in she's in for aerospace engineer. Yeah. I do, yeah. Yeah. I don't think any, maybe, well, I don't know. Maybe one of the boys is still there. Yeah, I don't remember. I think one of them maybe there, or still that. I'm not sure, because I can hear them. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Really? Oh, I think he was just in here last month or something. Yeah, yeah. About 1 year. Are you? Yeah, yeah, right. I will.
Which one? Oh, the signal. I think it'll be all right. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. I don't think anybody I don't even know if anybody knows that.
Have your attention, please. We'll call the meeting back to order. If everyone will take their seats. Okay, this is the time for a public hearing on this matter. As you've heard, the comments will be limited to 3 minutes. I've got a stack of requests here for folks to speak, and we'll go through these first. The first one I have is from Jerry Spear. Will you state your name and address for the record?
Hi, Jerry Spear. I live at 1425 Stellar Drive in Oviedo. I'm the preserve of Black Hammock, which is directly behind the proposed property. And before I get started, I'd like to thank the board. I love Oviedo. Thank you so much for making this a great community. We've been here since 2003, and we really love it here. So thank you for everything you've done. I'm not in favor of the plan, and the reason that I'm not in favor of it is, I believe that there are a lot of issues that can adversely impact my residence, my home. I'm an engineer and a homeowner that lives directly behind this, and my concern is that there's a potential for flooding. When the storms came through and the creek is behind us, water was almost up on my yard, and the soil there is very, very restrictive to drainage. It doesn't percolate well. I don't know if you've ever been out there, but Sweetwater Creek runs behind that property, and there was 15 feet of water in that creek during some of the recent storms. 15 feet. It's hard to believe, but it was a river back there. And runoff from this property will, I believe, possibly lead to flooding. As a homeowner and an expert on my property, I can guarantee you, I can show you where the water line was. Now that water proceeded to go down into the wetlands, and if you have a big development there with runoff from a parking lot, it's going to go right into the wetlands. If the creek is not maintained, that creek runs under the Leon Street. There's storm drains there. They're old. The infrastructure's old. They get blocked up. That's just life, right? They don't get cleared out. And again, if that happens, you're going to flood probably 10 or 11 homes there, I believe, on the adjacent side of the development. So that's a concern. The building height, there are storage areas in the local vicinity, and I use one of them. And I think storage areas are great. I really do. But they're all one story. So if we could stay with that consistent one-story storage area, I think it would really do a lot to mitigate the line of sight impacts. Nobody wants to have some big building looking down into your bedroom at night. And I have 5 sons, 4 still at home, and I really don't want people looking down into their bedrooms, nor do my neighbors. So the landscape buffers, if we can enhance, if this does get approved, how can we mitigate the impact to our neighborhood? And I think landscape buffering, managing the creek, managing the flood control issues there. I've only got 18 seconds left to go, so I have provided a note of these concerns, and that's it. And that quickly shows you what I believe to be the major adverse impacts to my property, which is the blue dot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next one is from Mario Canova. Did I say that correctly?
Good evening, and thanks for giving us the opportunity to present our issues. I represent 30 homes at Ellington Place, Ellington Estates off 434, and we totally oppose this special exception, and in fact I submitted petitions regarding this, and there have been comments during the discussion, and we believe that this adversely impacts the properties and the land uses within the immediate vicinity. And we are right across the street from this project. Also, the 7 criteria have been discussed in detail, and I've read them also in detail, and I don't feel comfortable that these criteria have been confirmed thoroughly or have been looked at thoroughly, because most of them in their answers show, and I quote, anticipated to, it appears that, and in general, it will. So with those criteria, and then it says confirmed, and the box was checked yes. And I don't think with the criteria of anticipated, it appears, and in general, nothing has been confirmed. The other one is the visibility. This is a corridor for people to come in and out of Oviedo, and transients that look coming into Oviedo, and to having this thing at the end of 434, before, if you're coming south, you enter the Oviedo area, you're going to see this big block of building in the middle of a residential area. It has no place in it. I think this gentleman talked about the stormwater. This parcel is very narrow. Where is all this water that all this concrete is going to create, and where is it going to flow? The zoning is inconsistent with the surrounding uses. Storage facilities, one of the things that I think one of you mentioned is the impact. How do you manage what is it that people are storing in these areas? They could be storing chemicals, they could be storing weapons, they could be storing any kind, and no matter what code or what the contract says, there is no way of managing what people bring in trucks and they put into those storage areas. This parcel, in our opinion, is more conducive to the other uses, or including maybe townhomes. That is, it will create more benefit, not only for the residents in that general area, but also for the city of Oviedo. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next one is from Katrina Shaddix.
Do I by chance get 6 minutes if I'm a director of a nonprofit organization?
I'm sorry?
Do I get 6 minutes if I'm a director of a nonprofit, or
No,
just
ma'am,
3 minutes?
you still get 3 minutes. You
Okay.
need to state your name and address for the record.
Katrina Shaddix, 1421 Brigham Loop, Geneva. Previously, as of about 6 months ago, I was at 995 Oklahoma Street, which is in Oviedo, in the Black Hammock. And this sort of reminded me of what happened right across the street from my house when Oviedo Gardens was built. The roads flooded immediately when they said they weren't going to flood. There were also, the entire little forest right there was destroyed in a matter of days. And from that point on, we had 3 years of constant noise pollution, even on the weekends before 7 a.m. I called the city to complain. Nothing was done with the code enforcement. So when you mentioned that code enforcement could be used to check and see what is inside, the storage units, that's an additional expense on the taxpayers. I don't think that should be something we're paying for when initially we don't even want the storage units to begin. So, but this also reminds me of a lawsuit that we're in right now. There was the city of Orlando spot zoned, almost just like this. It was a residential area, and they spot zoned it to build a warehouse. And that has caused a ton of environmental damage. And I would like to go over that with y'all before you make this decision, because there's just way too much to go into with what happened with that spot zoning. But what I want to recite is what my environmental attorney did a little research on Oviedo's special acceptance use order. And it says, an order issued by the City Council after recommendation of PZA, which allows certain uses within a zoning district that are not generally permissible throughout the district, but which, if controlled as to number, area, location, or relation to the neighborhood, could promote the public health, safety, and welfare. So the Oviedo ordinance gives the city council arbitrary and unfettered discretion to determine what can be built, where it can be built, how many can be built, and the exception could promote the public well-being. Well, this ordinance is arbitrary and capricious, but why? The general rule is that a zoning ordinance must prescribe definite standards and that the city council properly vested with discretionary rights in granting building permits or variances an exception to the zoning ordinance unless there has been established a definite standard to guide them in the exercise of such power. In other words, if definite standards are not included in the ordinance, it must be deemed unconstitutional as an invalid delegation of legislative power to an administrative board. An ordinance whereby the city council delegates itself to arbitrary and unfettered authority to decide where and how a particular structure shall be built or where...
I'm sorry, your time is up.
Okay, I have, can I give this to you? They are law cases that would support why this is arbitrary and unfettered. I think y'all should read over before you make a decision tonight.
You can give them to the clerk. Okay, the next question, or I'm sorry, the next speaker is Scott Clark.
Scott Clark, 1455 Stellar Drive, Oviedo. Good evening, Madam Chairman and board members. Thank you for giving myself and the others an opportunity to address you here this evening. I live in one of the homes within the Preserve at Black Hammock, which is directly behind the proposed storage facility. I have three specific concerns about the proposed business that I'd like to address with the board. First, I'm concerned about the exterior lighting for the proposed facility. As a resident directly behind this facility, I'm concerned about having high-intensity lights that are likely to shine directly into our bedrooms and our living rooms all night long. And although there is a conservation area that separates the proposed site from our homes, especially at this time of year, you can see that the foliage provides very little protection from bright lights. Second, I'm concerned about the noise and traffic associated with the comings and goings of a business that operates outside normal business hours. We had envisioned some sort of office-type business where the normal 9 to 5, Monday through Friday business traffic would not be a nuisance for most residents. But a storage facility is likely to generate traffic and noise in the evenings or on the weekends, which would be a great disturbance to anyone who borders this facility. Third, I feel that the proposed storage facility is not compatible or consistent with the adjacent properties. We had all expected businesses that would be designed to look more like residential homes, such as a doctor's office or another professional office building, that would be consistent with the look and feel of the surrounding neighborhoods, particularly in an area of the city that borders the rural Black Hammock. And we fear that an industrial storage facility is inconsistent with the desired appearance and will negatively impact property values for everyone around it. Now, in conclusion, I'm hoping that the board can deny this application based on these grounds and the others that will be presented here tonight. However, if the board finds insufficient grounds to deny this application, then at least require certain adjustments or modifications to the application in order to address those concerns prior to approval. Thank you.
Thank you. The next request is from Jess Abbott. State your name and address, please.
My name is Jeff Abbott. I live at 2300 Stone Street in Black Hammock, and I'm a member of the Black Hammock Association, and that's what the context which I want to address you tonight. My principal concern is Black Hammock worked very hard with Oviedo some time ago to set the zoning in place. There was a lot of discussions. It was difficult on both sides. We'd like to see that adhered to. So the special exemption, I've got some concerns in that. Beyond that, this is somewhat of the gateway to the rural area on this side of Oviedo. That is the access point into the rural area, and to see it marked, that land marked by storage units or warehouses is a concern. And the warehouse side is also, I haven't heard this discussed today, but it does say warehouse and storage units or storage units. And that concerns me in that the layout appears to be consistent with using it as a substation for shipping. And that would be a concern for me. I don't know what the specific constraints there are in terms of zoning here, but I don't see anything that would prevent, say, Amazon from using this as a storage facility with trucks coming in and out as a substation. So those are the kinds of concerns I have, principally the rural area in terms of this being sort of a landmark and entering there. It's very inconsistent. It does give it more of an industrial feel. I would much prefer something that would support the rural area businesses like office space and so on. I'm surprised that there isn't office space demand given the number of businesses in the Black Hammock area, landscape and so on, that don't have offices on site. So I would expect to see something, or would hope something more consistent with that use would be in place that would have more, as has been mentioned, regular hours type traffic. And in Black Hammock, I'm involved a lot in flood damage. In terms of flooding, I do a lot of work with the residents there. I am an engineer, so I've got some knowledge in that area. And I can guarantee there will be some flooding issues. There always are in development. But with Sweetwater Creek right there, this will constrain any overflow from Sweetwater Creek to go in only one other direction, and that will be toward the homes there. That this will effectively be a dam of sorts. The water is only going to flow in one direction. It will be to the residents. So that would concern me if I was living there. That will certainly happen. It happens every time we have development. So there's just no escaping that. Thank you for your time. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. The next request is from Ken Jacobs. Name and address, please.
Sure. My name's Ken Jacobs. I live at the Preserve of Black Hammock, 121 Galileo Way. Many of the things that I were going to talk about tonight have already been addressed, brought up by some of these other people, but I wanted to thank the board again and even the representation. Appreciate the forum. Thank you very much. But I just have three big concerns which have already been brought up, but is light pollution, noise pollution, and flooding. So you've heard it before from people that are a lot smarter than me, but I don't see how any of those things can be avoided with this development, so I'm opposed to it. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, the next request is Sam Nelson. Name and address, please.
Hi, my name is Sam Nelson. I'm at 1483 Myrtle Oaks Trail, which is in the Southern Oaks subdivision that's across De Leon Street from this proposed development. I'm strongly opposed to it. I can tell you as somebody, when I was in private practice, I represented several developers and REITs that both developed and operated storage facilities. And for someone to tell you all that somehow the storage facility is compatible with the neighborhoods that are out there, it isn't. There's no way to argue that it is. Particularly a two-story storage facility, there's no architectural flourishes you can put on it that will make it not be incompatible. It won't prevent people from accessing their homes, but they will look out their back door and see a two-story industrial building behind their house. No height of hurricane fence or chain link fence or anything will hide that from them. That's Sweetwater Creek that goes along the entire eastern side of that property. There is no way that they can mitigate enough to where it won't cause that creek to flood. That creek ultimately drains out into Lake Jessup. Them being required to mitigate by purchasing land in other areas to preserve will not help us. That's not helpful to the people that live around that development. So I would strongly encourage you all to deny their request. I personally, I can't speak for anyone else, I personally would much prefer an office building type, particularly professional office building like a doctor, a dentist, or accountants, things like that. That would be much more compatible to our homes out there. I know that it's zoned and they could have four-story buildings out there along this road, but really right now it's just our homes that are out there. And self-storage facility and warehouse facility right there. It's simply not compatible, and I don't know how someone could really argue that it is. It doesn't look like my house at all. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. The next request is from Michael Ney.
Yes.
Name and address, please.
Yeah, my name is Michael Ney. I'm at 1495 Stellar Drive in Oviedo, just adjacent to the property that is being proposed for this building site. I wanted to thank the council for giving me the opportunity to speak, and thank you to Mr. Sullivan for being patient, because this is kind of tough. But we just bought a home there, and we're obviously concerned about, number one, property values. Seeing a storage facility go in like that, as the previous speakers have said, it's really not compatible for a residential area. We have also concerns about the lighting and all the other things that have been said here. In particular, the water issue. I can tell you for sure, and I didn't know before I moved into the house that we had a water problem, but we definitely have a water problem in that neighborhood. We have standing water in our side yards, and it's actually been worse since, from what I'm told by the neighbors, it's been worse since the Southern Oaks facility was, the Southern Oaks development was built. So, that I don't know if you all know, but I believe, from what I'm told, that was a celery farm, and so they must have brought in a lot of clay in that area. So, as the previous speaker said, that the water doesn't percolate down through that soil, so it stands on top of the soil, and you can see the clay when you dig down through there. So that's really another issue. That entire area, all the houses that are adjacent to this property have that same soil. So you've got not only the installation of all that concrete that's going to go in to build this facility, but you also have a situation with the soil that's really has to be mitigated in some way. I've considered actually digging drainage ditches on my property, and the homeowners association may allow me to do that, but we definitely have a problem. After heavy rains, my neighbor's backyard is basically a pond, and that's directly adjacent to this, on the north side of this facility. So it's a concern that we have, and I think that's probably the largest concern. I've heard about the lighting, the height of the building, and all those things. I also agree with that it's really not compatible with a residential area. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, the next request is from Don Peterson. Name and address,
Evening.
please.
Yes, Don Peterson, Black Hammock. A few things I'd like to talk about, and one of them majorly has just been brought up, which is the Black Hammock western entrance. Black Hammock is very special. I don't know how much you all know about it, but there's 3 plants out there that don't grow anywhere else in this country. There's animals that are almost extinct that live out there, but we're not allowed to tell y'all that. Our group, the Black Hammock Association, is very concerned about the way things are out there and the development that's constantly encroaching. I will say that we did work very hard in 2010 to limit what was on the agenda for the developer at that time, which was 6 two-story office buildings. And what we got down to was 1 two-story building and 4 one-story buildings. And we got them to work real hard on coming up with a rustic appearance on the buildings, which I think for that particular area is very important. Not just a big giant sore thumb sticking out there for everybody to see. Normally these storage buildings are brightly colored in their design with the exterior all shiny and pretty for some folks, but that doesn't fit in out there. I think that, speaking of the cart before the horse, the state is going to change the road out there, something to consider. It's going to happen pretty soon. The hours, unlimited hours, 24/7 is completely not compatible to the residents in the area. And I don't live at that particular part in neither one of those subdivisions, but I'm sure that those people aren't too happy about 24 hours. Oviedo, no offense to anybody, is becoming a semi-high crime area. You put that building out there and let it operate 24/7, I promise you, you're going to have some trouble. And I wish it doesn't happen, but it probably will. So if we could maybe hold off on this vote tonight, table it to the next meeting or whatever, because there's so many unanswered questions. The road is coming. They don't have a wetland study. There's a few other studies they don't have. I just ask if you consider that tonight when you make your vote. Thank you very much, and appreciate the time to speak.
Thank you. The next request is from Roberta Gayer. Did I say that correctly? Name and address, please.
Roberto Gayer, 2220 Orange Street in the Black Hammock. I'm not going to talk about this project because it's insane what Oviedo, the city of Oviedo, the city of Winter Springs are so greedy and so irresponsible in destroying everything that's green around this county.
We'll have quiet in the room, please.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It looks like you are never satisfied with anything. Instead of considering this piece of land as a preservation, buying it, offering to your public, to your city, you don't care. You just want to put more and more concrete. And all these associations, all these groups that got problems with flooding is because this city relied on developers' studies. They didn't do, you guys didn't do your own work. You didn't do any specific and precise verification. And now they're suffering the consequences. And they should sue the city for your mistakes because they're suffering now for all this stuff. It's time, when they showed up the Google map, you see all the development is everywhere. There's not a piece of land, there is not a piece of green that's not covered by concrete. And then you're asking, how are you going to mitigate this? What kind of effect does it go to the wetlands and so on? What do you expect when you put a tarp over 50, 100, 200, 3,000 acres? Where do you expect the water to go? What effects do you think nothing's going to happen? No side effects? Well, then you need to wake up and start to work more diligently and protect your citizens and future development because you're going to have responsibilities. And these people, they should look into that. All these developments around. The same thing, the city, when they were discussing the Southern Oaks North, there were big, huge old trees, 100, 150 years old trees that were supposed to stay. I don't see any. You probably just gave in to the developers and just shaved everything off because it's more convenient for them, they can make more money, and you can get more taxes. But you know what? Even the roads that you have, Oviedo has been turned over the years in a reckless place. You fix 434, adding a bicycle lane. This is a crime scene in a sense. When you drive down that road, the lanes are so narrow that the trucks and people drive on the other side. And you're creating more and more problems by even adding this piece of development, which is uncalled for in that area. And another thing, thank God that we have still the Black Hammock and the rural area boundary, because if there were cities like yours in Winter Spring, they would already have develop all the way to the lake, and then probably they would have people coming in, oh, I got alligators in my backyard, I got bears in my front yard, I got hyenas and so on.
Thank
Sorry? No, but it's time for you to wake up and to make changes to this. Not just giving money. Remember, money, the economy, your city is the people. Your city, the economy of your city is people, not money.
I can have your attention, please, we'll call the meeting back to order. If everyone can take your seat, please. I'm sorry, can you take your seat, please? Okay, the next, before we start up again, I just want to say to you, we will have order here. You need to keep it in check, your emotions. We know everyone's upset about this sort of thing. That's why you're here tonight. But we do have police officers here, so if someone can't control their emotions, they will remove you from the chambers. And we don't want to have that happen. The next request that we have is from Laura Crawford. Can you state your name and address, please?
My name is Laura Crawford, 141 Ethan Hammock Court, and I'm a resident of Southern Oaks Phase 1. And I agree with everything that everybody's been saying. It's primarily a residential area, and to be putting a large storage facility in it's just going to be an eyesore. It's going to be so out of place. And I totally agree with what the last gentleman said. Honestly, I don't even know why it's slated for commercial to begin with. It used to be agricultural at one point, and honestly, I don't think anything should go there. I mean, you already heard about all the drainage issues and the issues with that, and it's just going to make things worse if you keep, putting concrete. There's just way too much development in that area to begin with. Also, I know that y'all say that it's not going to have an impact. The traffic, flow is supposed to be low, and all the studies show all this. You don't really know that until after the building is in place. Not only that, they're supposed to be widening that road. So it's going to be a 4-lane road. The light over at Hammock Lane is actually supposed to be temporary, according to Commissioner Bob Delary. That is actually supposed to be turned into a 2-lane roundabout. I think that y'all need to do things in progression. First, you need to fix the traffic problem and the road issue and make that safe for everybody before you go and start putting in large buildings. And you need to maybe coordinate with what's going to go on with that road before you even consider putting anything there at all. I guess that's all I have to say. Thank you, and I appreciate y'all doing your due diligence, and hopefully you can see your way to not allow this to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. The next request is from Christina Sink. Christina? Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry. Good evening. My name is Christina Sink, 1395 Stellar Drive. Thank you for taking the time tonight to let us speak. I would say my list that I made previously, and I've been taking notes, is pretty much what everybody has spoken about. I am very opposed to the development. I think the first thing that I looked at, I went to the city on Friday, and they talked about the special exception use orders, and the language in your own code that you wrote, the city and planning, it talks about how properties, land uses, immediate vicinity, and is otherwise consistent with sound land use practices. Again, the key word there to me was sound land use planning, which I don't feel. I think the problem tonight really is, and we wouldn't be here if this was not zoned what it's zoned. I think it clearly is zoned improperly. I think the parcel just to the south, it says it's like a little polygon-shaped parcel as well, is also commercial or OC. When I went to the city, I actually looked up everything online, and there's another zoning code that would be a little less noxious, residential professional office district, possibly that, or maybe the city should think about spending some money on buying that land instead of putting all the money. And I'm very new to Oviedo. I came to Oviedo because I thought property values were going to be good, stay high. There is a perceived, like a beauty about the city is growing. It's going to be seems like trying to be like a winter park. I don't know, I'm from Ohio. I went to school in North Carolina. So it's sad to see that I feel like Oviedo Boulevard and Mitchell Hammock is getting all the money, all the development, all the irrigation we're going to be paying for to water all that boulevard, and then there's this spot zoning going on, and it's not compatible at all with my home. That when I stand in my backyard, I'm a back parcel. There's a funny parcel that's there at the corner, the back Black Hammock Preserve. Mine is right next to him. When I stand in my backyard and I go like this, I can see the cars whizzing on 434. And that 434 actually, I don't know if you realize, it sits higher than us, which means water will flow, and if you put more impervious surface in the parcel that we're looking at, there's going to be additional, and like somebody said, you don't know what's going to happen until it's done. And I am a planner by trade. I have sat in that chair for a long time, and I was a board member for 8 years, Board of Zoning Appeals and Code Enforcement Board. And it is really hard, as you know, to fix it after the fact, or enforce it, or change it, because then they're protected, the developer. And so here, they're just here tonight applying because we have zoning on a piece of land that is wrong. And it needs to be addressed. So I guess that's my biggest concern. Oviedo needs to do the right thing and take a look at this zoning seriously. It's not in keeping with the area at all. To say within 1,000 feet is commercial, that's a tiny little treed over convenience store and dry cleaner or whatever is over there just around the corner. This would be an just ugly thing to see right there. So with that, I, again, very opposed, and I would hope you turn this project down. Thank you.
Thank you. The next request is from Derek Miller. Name and address, please.
1435 Stellar, Derek Miller. I'm at the Preserve at Black Hammock. I'm neighbors with Jerry, spoke earlier, also Scott. We're right up against the border right there in the Preserve at Black Hammock. So bunch of things have already been discussed, and I'm going to focus in on the enjoyability of residential property would be diminished based off of that understanding. You know, I did some research on storage facilities and break-ins based off of insiderselfstorage.com. I got some information that I want to leave with the secretary over here if possible. So I think line of sight would be another issue. I'd be concerned. I got 2 young daughters, and with the 40,000 square foot storage facility, just looking into my backyard, I think that would diminish, you know, the residential enjoyability. I have also, you know, with the fencing and, you know, the lighting, the shrubbery, the habitat reformation, there's a bunch of the areas that, you know, definitely would be under concern. I got a petition that I would like to leave with the secretary as well. Got over 300 signatures that are against the project back there in the hammock. And what we're trying to do is if, you know, you look at things that do bring down the value of your home, and this fits in the same category as power plants, also homeless shelters, strip clubs, and then also shooting ranges. So I just feel that bringing this type of reduced value to our backyard is just not very beneficial to Oviedo or ourselves. I also got here basically a radius of storage facilities in the vicinity. I'm going to leave this packet with you all that shows that, you know, within 5 miles that we've got, you know, a saturated, and where does this end? So now we're touching back in the hammock. Do we go to Pappy Strawberry Patch and put some up over there as well? So I'm trying to prevent and making a voice of, we want to save this for, you know, for our community, for us to have an enjoyable life and continue to just have a great time. We love the city of Oviedo, and we hope that you guys go ahead and deny this motion. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. No clapping, please. The next request is from Megan Sladek.
Good evening. My name is Megan Sladek, and I live at 6007 Lake Charm Circle. Hoping to touch on some things that we haven't discussed yet today. I might have to go freeform. I'm just going to go freeform here. One is the process. I think you guys know from my last 2 years on council, I'm no longer on council, which is why I'm here today. I value the process. And in reading the ordinance that governs this, I think it's very important to look at the criteria, not the criteria so much as that if you meet all of the criteria, the ordinance says that you may, without getting in trouble, then approve it. It does not say you must approve it. It says you may. And the definition of may is it implies a possibility that you might and you might not. So when you look at our land development code, everything that falls in that special exception column is 100% discretionary. You can say no, even if it checks all of those boxes. So I'm not going to get into the weeds about whether it does or doesn't. There's been lots of discussion about that already. What I think is important for a lot of the people in the audience is to let people know that this is not a matter of can we zone it or wish it to be something else. You guys know, sitting where you are, that it's zoned OC. It's office commercial. We're not going to be pulling back property rights without getting the city sued. So what is the solution here? And one potential solution is for the city to offer to purchase it from the current owner. The property was originally bought in 2014 for $15,000. So that is 3.5 acres for $15,000. I think if we were to offer twice as much, that might be a nice starting point for what could be done. And then the question becomes, well, how would we purchase it? And one of the ways we could is with the 2014 infrastructure sales tax, and that's the 1 cent penny, the penny sales tax. There's a variety of different places that this can be spent. One of them is for stormwater and drainage, and we would have to have a discussion with the county about how to facilitate that. But I would encourage you for now to just say no, because you can. It is within your discretion. It's what they want to do right now. Saying no would allow us to pause and see if we may be able to work out a purchase. Because the people in this room, what I'm hearing is that nobody really wants anything there. But the property owner has a right to put something there. And we cannot take that away without compensating. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next request is from Kristen Ike. Did I say that correctly?
Good evening. My name is Kristen Ike, 129 Ethan Hammock Court. I live in Southern Oaks Phase 1. I am a municipal and land use attorney. I've been practicing this type of law for 10 years, and I'm very familiar with special exceptions and the standards therefore. I'm here in my individual capacity. I'm not representing anyone, but I happen to live across the street in Southern Oaks Phase 1, and the back of my house looks directly onto this piece of property. So I do have particular injury with respect to this, this project. As someone with experience with special exceptions, I do not believe that the use as proposed meets the criteria. And I think that there needs to be numerous additional conditions limiting the scope of the use in order to even consider granting the special exception. We've already talked about building height, so I won't go into that. Landscaping. Right now, there is only landscaping buffer proposed on the eastern side. As I said, I'm looking onto this piece of property from the west. There's no landscape buffer proposed around the west side or the north side for the Southern Oaks folks that live in the phases 2 and 3. Signage. There is no proposed limitation on signage. And I see in the concept plan that there is neon signage proposed on the second story of this that everyone will be able to see for quite a ways around. I propose that that be limited to the first story, any wall signage, and secondly, that any monument signs need to be cannot be self-illuminating. They need to be lit from outside. The Ladybird and the Sweetwater Shopping Center both have signs that are, or actually Ladybird has no sign, and the shopping center has just it's not self-illuminated. The building design, I think, is, I'm sorry to say, I think there's been a minimal effort in terms of the building design right now. I understand that there's going to be architectural review. However, I don't think that anyone needs to wait until the architectural review board or whoever that is, or the city council, determines that this is compatible. I think this board can impose conditions
One of those being something like there be varied facade articulation, there be decorative gates, you know, using high quality materials, things like that. And I do have pictures of what the city of Winter Springs was considering, and I would like to pass those out to you. And finally, I'd like to talk about...
I'm sorry, your time is
Okay, thank you. I would like to pass these out to you, however. And I've listed the conditions.
Do you
that
have
I
an
would-
extra set?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, the next request we have is Rick Ashby. Mr. Ashby? Decided not to stick around? Okay. The next one is from Robert Weiss. Name and address, please.
My name is Robert J. Weiss. I live at 1165 Stellar Drive. Thank you, Madam Chairman, Planning Council members, for giving me this opportunity to provide some remarks. I don't believe the special exception should be granted. I was disappointed to hear the rationale by staff. I'd like to give you a little background briefly of who I am. I'm a qualified expert in this subject. I'm a registered architect. I'm a consulting engineer. I am a lead professional. I'm a professional planner. In the last year, I've evaluated probably 25 self-storage facility projects sponsored by real estate investment trusts around the country. I'm not here in a professional capacity, but I also don't want to be perceived as a NIMBY. As my planning colleagues will know, that's not in my backyard type of argument that someone might make because they don't want to be personally impacted by something that's in their backyard, but which is still may be needed by the community, which is my first point. One of the things that LEED teaches is a different set of criteria than your staff has used, and I'd like to ask staff to consider them. I'd like you to consider them. I have 7 as well. The first is compatibility. Some of these issues have been raised. The first is compatibility and transition. I think a lot of comments have been made about that. You just have to look at an aerial photograph to determine whether this is compatible, but there are 6 other criteria. Social issues, school buses let children off at that area there. This property, if it went forward as proposed, would bring in a demographic of tradesmen and other individuals that use the self-storage facility as mini warehouses from which they can do their work. Anything can happen in this warehouse. It is a mystery, and the sponsor of this development cannot make any promises at all as to what might go on inside those self-storage units. Could be anything from explosives to firearms, as explained, but it could be band saws, and it could be a light manufacturing activity. These types of properties are usually considered to be light industrial. They are not considered to be industrial in the professional journals. The environmental impacts, some of which have been touched on, but there are others. When individuals work out of these self-storage facilities, if they have waste streams associated with their work, buckets of oil, chemicals that they want to dispose of, they look both ways, and very often they dispose of those chemicals in the sewer, which of course falls into receiving bodies of water, which will impact local water quality, surface water quality. The aesthetics issues, which have already been discussed, including light impacts, noise impacts, have not really been addressed that much. But if someone does have a
Mr. Weiss,
workshop...
I'm sorry, your time is up.
Thank you for this opportunity. I'd be happy to provide my 7 criteria to staff.
Thank you. Okay, the last one. Michael Barker. Name and address, please.
Yes, my name is Michael Barker. I'm a resident of Southern Oaks. And I just want to touch on a few points. I The area surrounding the proposed storage facility is nothing like it was in 2008, nor even in 2015 when the last extension was approved through. There are several new neighborhoods, such as Southern Oaks and others, and I really question the reliance on a study that is so obsolete and so non-applicable nowadays. I mean, that area is nothing like it was. Also, I'd like to, in case the board is not aware, Winter Springs did deny a request for a storage facility within 1,000 feet of this proposed facility. And if you're not aware of that, I would encourage you to reach out to Winter Springs and understand the reasons why they denied this request for a storage facility. And the traffic on 434 is hectic. It doesn't matter if it's 9 a.m., 3 p.m. on a Saturday, Sunday. And I think the study said 60 vehicles, but we're really not talking vehicles. We're talking, diesel-powered Ryder 26-foot trucks. And that will have a traffic impact. When we talk about compatibility, just the smell of all that diesel, the sound, backing up into the storage facility, it will impact the neighboring residents' ability to, enjoy their homes. Well, thank you for the time.
Thank you. Okay, that was the last request we had. Now we'll move on we'll close public hearing. This is time for a rebuttal by the applicant. Mr. Sullivan, do you have something you'd like to address?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. Again, Tom Sullivan for the record. I'll just be brief. I think we had a detailed discussion on the front end before the public comment, and I think a lot of I don't want to be repetitive with some of the points that I already made. I do want to say that I do appreciate everyone that came to talk tonight, and I mean that sincerely, even though I know there's disagreement about what we're proposing. I think what I want to really highlight for you is I think that a lot of the concerns that were raised really are largely applicable to any non-residential use. I mean, the flooding, for example, if the property is developed, there's going to be impervious surface that's created. Of course, the developer would have to meet all the water management district and other criteria to not create any additional runoff onto properties. But my point, just using flooding as an example, is that that concern is one that I don't believe is related to the use of the property as a storage facility. The last thing I would really say is that at the beginning of tonight's meeting, as the city attorney pointed out, this is a quasi-judicial hearing. You've been presented with competent, substantial evidence in the form of the staff report, which includes your city staff's professional recommendation for approval. I don't believe that you've been presented with competent, substantial evidence that rebuts that finding. I think we've demonstrated that we meet the 7 criteria. And with that said, I believe that this is a reasonable request in terms of scale, in terms of the conditions, the additional conditions that we proposed, and that it's compatible and consistent as noted in the staff report. And we would very much appreciate your recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, what's the board's pleasure?
Madam Chair?
Mr. Pollack?
I would like to make a motion not to recommend resolution number 3680, a special exception use order for the Black Hammock storage area.
Can I repeat that? Do you mean motion to recommend
Not
denial?
to recommend. Yeah, to recommend denial, yes, ma'am.
So motion to deny, motion to deny.
Motion to deny. However, I need to say that.
But we'll need you to specify the criteria by which you're finding the criteria is not met in your motion, please.
I would like to make a motion to deny resolution number 368019 special exception use order for Black Hammock storage based on the fact that I have not been convinced by a clear and convincing standard that the 7 criteria necessary to allow us to grant the special exception has been met. What I've heard through a lot of really good testimony is basically a set of assumptions of things that we imagine the impact would be. I saw with respect to the water mitigation, or I'm sorry, for the wetland, that those things would be dealt with. However, they weren't able to identify what impact it would have. A traffic study would not be necessary because of our assumption that there would be such a limited impact. Similarly, there was similar assumptions made with respect to the impact. With all of these various assumptions being made, I appreciate the applicant's assertions that this was demonstrated by the staff report, but I have not yet seen in the staff report what evidence that has been submitted other than these series of assumptions, and based on that, I would make the motion to deny.
So all the criteria then?
What's that?
All the criteria?
Not all the criteria. There's 4 elements specifically I would point to.
If you could, thank you.
Okay, the adverse impact. I'm not convinced that...
Just point of order, this isn't discussion, this is motion, so just list what they are, so we know what we're...
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Minton.
Yes, here are the
Please
four
be quiet.
Here are the 4 criteria that I'm specifically relying on.
Thank you.
With the first one being land use compatibility. The second one, and specifically with the adverse impact to the immediate vicinity. The second one is the proper mitigative techniques. I think it's been established that we're not exactly sure the impact that it would have to the vicinity. We're making a series of assumptions, and based on, even though the applicant has given the inference that he would go above and beyond to mitigate, we still don't know how that mitigation...
You don't have to explain it, just
okay.
list it.
Sure, sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Third, the hazardous waste. We don't know what people would be storing in it, so I don't know how we
Sir,
can...
just list them, please.
Finally, wait for it.
You can discuss it.
Adverse wetland. Oh, those are the 4 things: the adverse impact, the wetland impact, mitigative techniques, hazardous waste.
Thank you.
I get excited.
So that's the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Gashlin, thank you. Okay, Mr. Pollack, do you have any discussion on this item?
I think my motion was a discussion, but...
Quite a bit.
But I could further go. But yeah, that's basically what I'm relying on. I think the applicant did a great job and staff did a great job answering questions. I just haven't seen anything other than these series of assumptions, and I don't doubt the effort that the city would undertake or the applicant to make everybody feel good. But at this point, I don't think the criteria is satisfied for us to grant this special exception.
Mr. Gashlin, do you have anything to add?
No, I do not.
Is there any other discussion? Mr. Minton, do you have anything?
I do, but I'm not sure where to start. I've listened to everything, I've taken notes. I mean, I think to the applicant's rebuttal point that some of the issues that have been brought up is true, that no matter what gets developed there are going to be issues. The drainage and flooding issues, I think, is inevitable regardless of what gets built there. Even if you put townhouses there, as one speaker suggested, I think that's going to be an issue no matter what. And the focus at hand here is the exception order, not the fact that the land can't be developed or not. As was mentioned by a couple of people, there are property rights. It is office commercial. As long as it stays in that zoning, something can be built there. So some of these issues is not at hand. As far as the issue for what's at hand, one thing I'm wrestling with is in the land use compatibility, because a part of the ordinance that was not addressed in the staff report is the phrase, or otherwise be adverse to the public interest. And I've asked staff about this, I asked the attorneys about this, of what is the definition of adverse to the public interest and who determines that. Obviously, staff has their interpretation that it's not adverse based on the criteria they followed. The applicant obviously feels it's not adverse. There's a lot of other people here that have spoken that they do. But it's so ambiguous, I feel, in the code of what that means that I don't know how to use it as any type of way to approve or deny. I don't know how you prove that. I just don't know how you can sit here and show that it is or isn't adverse to the public interest. And that's the part I'm wrestling with here, is that I don't think it's been proven either way. I have concerns, like I mentioned, about the sound and the noise and the traffic, not so much the traffic about being in 24 hours, because I don't think it will be used that often in the off hours, but it is a question I have. I do agree to some point with Mr. Pollack that there are some mitigations here that haven't been fully addressed, but then again, is this the place to address it? Because like I said, it's going to get developed most likely in any other way as well, and that's going to have to come up at the architectural design and site plan. Could we delay this so that we can get some of these other questions answered about the noise, about the flooding impact? Have we seen, is there a flood plan study that's already been done on that property that's not in our packet? I mean, is that something we can add and look at? I think there are more questions, so maybe the possibility of a stay and a delay could be appropriate here. Ultimately, so that everybody can understand, the decision we make here is just a suggestion to the council. They have final decision. So even no matter which way we vote, they could always vote the opposite. But I don't know. I don't know where I want to go with this.
Tommy, if I may, to your point, you know,
Mr. Pollard?
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry for not asking to be recognized. You know, I similarly struggled with whether or not I felt convinced, and I use that language a lot. The thing is, the applicant here and has the burden, and in relying on the city's recommendation, they've deferred the burden to the city. If you're not sure if it's fallen either way, I don't see how the burden, and I believe in this case it's clear and convincing, and correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not sure if you're not sure either way how the preponderance of how the evidentiary standard has been met, and that's sort of how, you know, I sort of felt, because, you know, if I'm not convinced, then I'm not convinced, and I feel like the burden of proof hasn't been met at that point.
Is there any other discussion?
One other point of order. Okay.
I'm sorry. A point of order?
One other point of order is that we did have information submitted during the public comment that we have not reviewed. Would it be appropriate to take a recess before we vote to review that evidence?
Depends on what items we're talking about. Depends on what items you're talking about. Not all of them are admissible. Some of them, like the legal cases, for example, you can only take legal advice from me. Because, well, you're a qualified attorney, but
not here.
but there's, you know, we would need to review those. The letters could be read into the record so that everybody could hear them. That would be the proper procedure if you wanted to review letters that you haven't had time.
I'm more going to think that just the stuff that's been submitted tonight, not the stuff that we already had, but the stuff that was brought up during the course of the public hearing. We haven't looked at all that. So, I mean, is it appropriate for you to look at to determine if it is admissible before we go to vote?
Applicant, do you have an objection or opinion on this? Because at this point, we're at discussion and motion.
So is the question whether there should be some kind of a delay while tonight's meeting goes on to review some things that were submitted into the record?
I think that's what you're asking.
Yeah, I wouldn't have an objection to you doing that. I mean, I will say that we just for various reasons, really related to timing on our side, sort of on the developer side of this, we really do want you to make a recommendation tonight. Understanding what that may or may not be. But yeah, I certainly appreciate sincerely the desire to sort of look at everything and see if there's something that kind of impacts your decision, how you feel about it. So I wouldn't have any problem with pausing and giving you time to look over stuff and then reconvening tonight's meeting. So hopefully that answers the question.
Jennifer, is that something that you would need to look at?
Yes, I would.
First?
It's unusual, and it's unusual. But yeah, I'd need to read those over first. It can be done quickly, though. I mean, they're all pretty much part of the record. I mean, how long would you think you all would take to do that?
Depending on what's there, I don't think it would take too long.
How much
Especially if
time
you
is-
determine that it's not admissible, then it won't take us long at all.
True.
What, if we paused it and for tonight, or, you know, moved it to another meeting, would it delay the whole entire process? Because
Yes, it would.
like almost 2 months,
Yeah,
or like a month and a half, because
Particularly-
we have to review it before city council, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And
Wanted to make sure we weren't going to
Well,
get
I guess,
skipped
I mean,
over.
there's
We
two
did that.
separate things on the table. I mean, delaying to get all this other stuff, that's a separate,
Right.
outside of this motion. In this motion, my question is, before we vote on this motion, we haven't looked at what was submitted tonight.
I wanted to verify that we would
Still-
still get to look at it again if we did, because it's supposed to go to city council on January 9th, and I want to make sure we don't miss out on our opportunity.
No. So what I'm saying right now on this one is if we looked at it tonight and still came back
Yeah.
tonight.
I understand that, yeah.
And do it. That's the part I'm asking about now, is if we are really required to do due diligence to look at that that's been submitted.
I mean, yeah, I mean, we could, yeah, go ahead.
Madam Chair, boards, the item hasn't been scheduled to go to council. If the board decides to delay it, to take it to the next meeting will be January 15th, and then the decision could be made there to deny, approve, or approve of conditions. At that point, we could take it to council.
We'd need to hear from the applicant on that as well, though.
Yeah, but just so you know, the next meeting of this board is January 15th.
And then the next meeting of council after that is when?
February 5th, I believe. But we would need to have the 3 weeks of advertising time.
So we're talking at least a month, pushing it out. Mr. Sullivan?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just to be clear, and like I said, we still hope that you make a recommendation in favor of this, but just, and I do think, and the city attorney can correct me, but I do think as the applicant, it is our preference on whether to have a vote tonight or not is one that I want to make clear that we would like to have a decision made tonight by this group, and as I said, understanding that could go for approval or for denial. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, I've made my motion based on the evidence that we currently have, and the evidence has been submitted by the people here. I don't think it's going to disprove my basis for the motion. So with that being said, I'm not sure the delay would inevitably have any impact on my motion, which has been seconded and discussed. But if there's any board member who's on the fence, you know, if they feel like that's what it's necessary, if Tommy, that's what you feel like you need, I mean, I'm not going to object to it. I don't need any time to review it. I've heard what everyone had to say.
Thank you. Mr. Gashlin?
I still second it.
Okay. Ms. Swellen? Do you want to review the information tonight?
Sorry, yes. Yes.
I guess then,
Is that,
Jennifer,
you have a
help me out here
consensus on that? I mean,
procedurally.
okay, so do we have a consensus on that everyone wants to review it? Because you would need, I mean, does everybody agree? Because you just have one.
I don't want to. I don't want to. But I don't want to be disrespectful to the board members either. I just feel like we have enough evidence at this point. We've been here a while.
I don't feel like I need to review it any further, and Mr. Gashlin, you do not. Ms. Swetland, you wanted to, so that's 3-2.
Like I said, if you need consensus, we don't have it, then we move on.
I mean, I think it is all information from the opposition. If anything, the applicant would have the opportunity to provide an additional information to be submitted. You know, it's opposition information, basically. So being that you don't have a consensus, I would think you should move forward on the motion. If you really don't feel you can make an informed decision at this point, then we'll reconsider the consensus and take a break.
Okay, the motion before us is to recommend denial. Is there any other discussion at this point?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Minton?
I mean, I feel like, yes, there's enough information here if the consensus is not to look at what else was submitted and move on with what we have. I mean, I feel like I'm at a point of just trying to determine what's morally right versus what's legal. Every discussion I've had with staff and the city attorney this week has seemed like legally there's nothing here. There's not been the competent evidence to show this. I still don't believe we've proven that it's not adverse to the public interest. I think 17 votes of people that said opposed versus 2 or 3 staff members and an applicant that said it was okay shows it's adverse to public interest. That's the morally right side of this, but Legally? I don't know. I don't see it.
Mr. Minton, I will change my position on reviewing the material. So now we have 3 to 2 to review it.
If I can just give you a little legal reminder.
Thank you.
Substantial competent evidence. Generalized opinions and complaints without more do not constitute competent substantial evidence. Sorry, trying to knock the cough. So generally, lay opinions do not constitute competent substantial evidence. I've told you all that before, but just a reminder.
Can I ask a question on that? If somebody, an attorney who's practiced 10 years in the field, specifically on land use and development, and an engineer and an architect who work specifically, are those considered lay opinions at that point?
Statements of counsel, other than me, should be considered argument, not testimony. The other experts, if they were an expert in the field with which they talked about, they could be considered as substantial or competent evidence because they're experts in that field. But only as to those matters, specifically the planner or the engineer who was here, only to those matters that they're an expert in.
So, if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is the documents that have been submitted, we can consider as argumentative, not as competent evidence?
You can't take any legal opinion from anyone but me, and you shouldn't be interpreting case law.
But it can still contribute to our conclusion that the staff recommendation hasn't fully considered or hasn't provided convincing evidence.
Without looking at that, I couldn't tell you. I mean, I don't know what those cases say. I haven't looked at them.
Okay.
He hasn't looked at them. We don't know if they're relevant. You know, some statements were made about spot zoning. You know,
so if I'm understanding you correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, by looking at these statements and or changing or making a decision, it's potentially not a good thing for us rather than to just make a decision on the record?
One more time, restate that.
Sorry, I
Lawyers talking to us.
I know, sorry. So if I'm understanding you correctly, the documents that members of this board wish to review are to be basically the way we consider that evidence. To address Tommy's point, I don't think it's not going to make him feel any better legally, is what you're saying, because he can't use those to justify. Is that what you're saying?
I presented them ahead of time to look them over thoroughly and evaluate them, and nor was I. Only the ones specifically that were submitted, there was like 3. So those we could evaluate. The others you could just briefly evaluate while you're up here procedurally and enter them into the record. It's not standard practice to take a break and review them all, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Sullivan.
So when you do things that are not standard,
correct,
it's generally not a good thing.
Correct.
So what I would suggest is, and I'm not, if you still want time to review it, what I would suggest is, based on what you're saying, is the fact that we take the time to review it actually can call into question the decisions we're making versus making a decision based on the evidence that we've already been presented. And I just don't want to do anything that calls into question the decision-making of this board tonight.
I would just say the decision-making of the board should be based on competent, substantial evidence by people who have the ability to testify as to what they testified to, and not give lay opinion and testimony more value than it's worth.
But on the other side of that, whether or not that competent evidence has met the burden.
Correct.
Has met the burden of proof.
Right.
Yeah.
But staff's expert opinion is as to, it's considered expert testimony as to the fact that there is substantial competent evidence. It would have to be rebutted by the opposition by substantial competent evidence that that criteria was not met.
Right. Or unless, in my case, the board were to determine that the evidence, the substantial competent evidence that was submitted.
Yeah. It's kind of like a rebuttable presumption.
Okay. But if I feel like that the evidence being submitted, because like Tommy was saying, you know, it's staff and the applicant.
Right. But
you have to weigh the argument versus how convinced you are by the report, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right. But it does carry rebuttable presumption. You understand what that means.
Well, could you explain it for people who haven't been law school?
It basically, it kind of speaks for itself that it meets the criteria, and then you have to present something against it to defeat it.
If we were to assume that this report
Well,
contains
legally,
the answers to the questions that are necessary that need to be answered.
Well, legally in this situation, it does carry that rebuttable presumption as being met based on staff's professional experience. That's this legal standard.
Okay.
Do you wish to contribute, applicant? Or am I misstating anything?
My understanding of the case law on special exceptions and conditional use cases is that once there's competent substantial evidence that's presented during the hearing that the criteria are met, the presumption is that the use is permitted unless it's rebutted by competent substantial evidence that it doesn't meet those criteria. That's why I was saying I don't believe that was done tonight. So I think we're saying the same thing. That there's several cases about that deal directly with the issue.
So you have something? I'm sorry.
Okay, so forgive me here because my field is not law, and I'm trying to get to this. So if I'm understanding this, if after the staff report came out, one of these planners, architects, engineers, lead certifiers submitted a report that showed documented backup or documented with evidence that says this is where the staff's claims are contrary, we could have
You would have
used
to weigh,
that. We could have considered that.
Yes, you would have to weigh them and compare them and determine which you found more credible.
But them just speaking to that fact of what they know is not sufficient.
It can be. It can be, depending on what they submit and what they speak about. But if they speak about things outside their expertise.
But now we've heard from people, 3 people in particular that I can remember. There was somebody who spoke within their expertise. Particularly, there was a land use attorney, 10 years experience in that field.
You can't take legal advice from.
No, I'm not saying legally it's what we should do. I'm talking about from an evidentiary standpoint. That it's not, it has a higher standard than just lay, because what you just said, use that standard again that you
It's all argument. The statement of counsel shall only be considered as argument, not testimony. So it can't be substantial competent evidence, in my opinion. I'm the only lawyer you can take advice from, and everything else is argument.
Then take the lawyer part aside, because we're getting hung up on that. What about the architect?
The architect, I'm not sure what.
He noted that he had specific experience with self-storage.
And
I don't remember his name, I apologize.
that was Mr. Weiss.
What criteria wasn't met?
Mr. Weiss. Mr. Weiss said he's an architect. Yeah.
Charlie.
I saw a timeout. Is there a flag on the play?
Mr. Pollack, just a minute. Dr. Carrera, can you help us?
Well, I would just say that you have to present evidence, right, on the use. So a lot of the arguments that were made, first, this is not a spot zoning, right? A lot of the arguments against development on the site are not valid at this point because there is an OC zoning. There are by right uses for that property. So what are the issues? There are pertaining particularly to for the special exception use order for self-storage, because it's what's in front of you. It's the consideration of a special exception use order for self-storage. So the drainage is an issue of any development, right? And that is an important issue, but any site plan, any development in that site will have to prove that they meet drainage issues. So that's not something for self-storage, because any use by right will have to meet that criteria as well. The same thing with the wetland consideration. They did not have to provide a study now. They don't have to provide even a site plan at this point. It was just conceptual, right? And the conceptual site plan was to be able to help, the residents and the board to reach out the mitigations. What are the things that, that site could be, if there is any impact on the community, what are the issues that the community claim to be important for them that they want to be mitigated? The height, the buffer, landscape, a wall, signage. These are all important issues that could be considered. So I'm just trying to guide you in the sense that there were some arguments being made, but you need to show evidence that that use is not compatible, right, with the surrounding neighborhood, and they can address architecture is something in the scale, is something on the hours of operation that can be mitigated. But we have to address the specific issues with the use and not with development as a whole.
Madam Chair,
about any development.
Madam Chair, can I ask a question?
Mr. Peller?
So is it my understanding and what you're advising and you're advising is that if the staff report says they recommend this, and nobody in this room, despite their opposition, has presented competent evidence from an expert?
Which is, and entered their qualifications into the record and certified as an expert.
Then,
We probably could have.
then we have no choice but to approve this?
No, I'm not saying that.
I didn't say that. I mean, that
Please
is...
be
No,
quiet
I'm
in
not
the
trying to be
chambers.
silly. I'm really not. I'm honestly asking because
What I'm saying that what you have to consider is that if there was evidence presented to you against the use, right? Because that's what is in front of you. If you consider there was evidence presented to you that showed to you that the use is not compatible, you have to use, you can use that, but you have to use that evidence to claim your denial, to base your denial.
So the testimony you heard today, can that rebut the argument contained in the staff report? Or no, because they're not qualified experts? I mean, they live there, that makes them experts, right?
No. No. Pardon me, this is not...
Please be quiet in the chambers. Sir.
No one's saying you have to approve it. All I'm saying is legally you may be overturned if you don't meet the proper criteria and follow the correct law and the procedures.
And so is there no legal basis without somebody having an expert to rebut anything in here? There's no legal
Generally,
basis for us to deny it?
lay opinions are not substantial competent evidence. Only an expert. Just being a layperson who knows the area does not make you an expert.
So then as a quasi-judicial body, what authority do we have right now with this, I guess? My question, I don't want us to do anything illegal. I don't want anybody to get sued, regardless of how good it is for people in my profession. But my question is to you, is if I don't feel that the information contained in the staff report, as a board member, if I don't feel that the information contained in the staff report has sufficient support in its own document, can I use that as a basis to recommend denial?
Please be quiet.
I don't know if they're attorneys, but they haven't qualified that for the record.
I think they're... I can't make you vote one way or another. Legally, I've told you it's a rebuttable presumption, and the staff's report meets the criteria. If you decide that you don't feel it does and you vote against it, then that's your vote. Whether it's upheld or not, I can't tell you that.
Okay, but if I feel like it hasn't met that, then I can vote no. But I'm not doing something improper by doing that, right?
Well, you're going against the rebuttable presumption, but if you feel that there was substantial competent evidence that it wasn't met, then that's how you would vote. I can't tell you how to vote.
No, I understand. But does anybody else have something here to...
Okay. Madam Chair, if I might.
Mr. Minton.
If procedural, if we voted to deny, do we have to then explain to council the why we denied and show them that competent evidence?
You've already done that with your motion, and he's explained it, and you've discussed it.
I know, but you're saying, but you've said that we can only deny with, well, I wrote it down. Hold on. Substantial competent evidence. Do we have to show that substantial competent evidence to the council to say this is why we denied? I mean,
All
we've
you
said
have
the
is
motion
what
is
you-
denied because of A, B, C, and D.
I mean,
But
you
do we have
can't
to
go back
show-
in time and redo it. It's already submitted. What was submitted was already submitted.
Okay.
So all you
I'm
can
just-
do
I'm
is
just trying to
based on the
understand
record.
I'm just trying to understand procedural what we were sending to council. If we
You're
deny, it's just a deny based on we didn't feel A, B, C, and D were met.
Correct.
But we don't have to say why. We don't have to say what evidence we had
Well, they'll
that
have the
said it.
minute, I mean, they'll have the minutes then, or no? They will have the minutes by then? Yeah. So if they'll have the minutes at that point.
And they could
You've already
disagree.
discussed it ad infinitum.
And they could disagree with our
They can.
recommendation.
They can.
So we're just recommending. So the decision we
Correct.
make tonight isn't binding on the city in any way. It's just a recommendation.
Correct.
So if we feel like it has been met and the city council disagrees with us, they're within their right to disagree with our recommendation, correct?
Correct.
So we wouldn't be doing any harm to the city by recommending a denial. They don't have to accept the recommendation at this point, right?
I would not think that that's something I should opine on.
Okay,
I think
well.
that's a...
Mr. Pollak, do you have your answer as to?
I have enough of an answer that I'm going to keep my motion on the floor, and I think we still have to determine if we need to review the evidence. I think that's where we're at. I think no at this point.
But can I just say one last thing?
Mr. Minton.
Okay. Whatever this vote goes down to do, and it goes to council, and whatever council does, and I know I have no authority here to do this, but I would just hope that the applicant has heard all the concerns here, that if it does go your way, you do get approval from the council, you have understood the concerns here and can try to mitigate as much as possible. You know, and I hope that the residents understand clearly in 3 hours here what the challenge we have up here is, that this is not cut and dry. Yeah, the city buying the land, we can't even recommend that. That's not an option we can send forward to say. So I'm done. Let's just vote. I'll let you have something to say because you're the only one that hasn't really said anything.
In reviewing all of this and seeing that there was really no, what I would consider substantial competent evidence submitted tonight, our professional staff has reviewed the application. It's a special exception use that is allowed by our LDC. Staff has reviewed it and said it meets the criteria. And we haven't seen anything so far tonight that rebuts that from what I've seen. So from that standpoint, I would vote to approve this. I'm sorry, can we please be quiet in
Madam Chair.
in the chambers?
Madam Chair, we don't have a motion to approve. We have a seconded motion to deny. Don't we have to vote on that?
That's not her official vote. That's just her.
Perhaps you misunderstood what
I apologize. I misunderstood. I think that's what the reaction was. I think they didn't. I think people thought that you were.
I think I got it.
That's not her.
I apologize.
We haven't called it to vote, so she's
Mr.
still
Gashlin or
discussing.
Ms. Swetland, do you have anything else to add to the discussion?
I don't really have anything important to add. I mean, I just don't feel that this is really compatible with the area. I've known this area for like 30 years, and I just don't see it. It's really all.
Ms. Swetland, do you have anything else?
No, I don't.
Okay. No other discussion. The motion before us is to recommend denial of the application with the 4 items that were cited as land use compatibility, adverse impact, mitigative techniques, and hazardous waste. So all those in favor of the motion to recommend denial, say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay.
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 Can we have a roll call? I'm sorry.
I believe we had 3 days.
Deny.
Nay.
So the motion fails.
So the motion to deny fails. To restate that for the public.
Yes, the motion to deny failed.
Okay.
So now, what's the board's pleasure? Do we
So
have
the motion to deny failed. So are there any other motions?
Do we have to make any other motions?
Yes, you need to take action. Or
we have to take action on the matter.
So what's the other option?
That was my point.
Well, there are other, we can,
I don't have that list of what we usually have, where it usually says here, what are our 4
it's on the
options,
first
5
page
options.
of your memorandum at the bottom, what we can do.
Oh, it's not in the usual spot. Usually it's on the last page.
Dr. Carrera?
Yeah. So if I could help guide you in the way that, so you have 2 things that you could consider. One is if the special exception use order should be allowed or not, right, recommended or not as presented. And the second thing is if there are mitigations that can be proposed or increased so that to mitigate, you know, the use. Hearing what the community has brought to you. So that's the second consideration.
Okay, on that question then, approve with revisions, can they be conditions and pending conditions? I mean, are we allowed to do something like approve pending a full wetlands impact study, a full study of lead certification, a full whatever else we want to do? I mean, are we allowed to do that?
With applicant consent.
Or is this just
we would
straight
need to
up?
weigh in.
We can place conditions, but I don't believe,
That's what I'm saying. Can
We
those
can
conditions be a pending condition?
I don't believe so, but we'll
No,
ask
you
Jennifer.
either make conditions or you don't, but the applicant would need to agree.
So, I think I follow what you're saying. I mean, yeah, I mean, so like the example of, well, I guess where I would start off with is you may want to consider the two specific ones that I had put forth on the height, on the dark skies lighting. I mean, I tried to kind of write those so they're easy to drop in if you're so inclined into a motion. The pending conditions, I think something along the lines of, subject to, I think it would probably need to say something like, on the wetlands, for example, subject to a final wetland delineation and permitting, consistent with all applicable regulations or something like that. That's,
Isn't that already?
yeah, we wouldn't have any issue with that. I just wouldn't want there to be something kind of too abstract in there. So don't have a problem with the concept, but it sort of depends particularly what you're talking about. I will say, just to clarify one thing, because I think you were listing it as kind of one of the examples. The LEED certification, I mean, that's like a type of green building thing. That's not what we're proposing here, so that we would have an issue with, honestly. But I mean, the nuts and bolts things we talked about, considerations on the buffering, the height, the lighting, all that kind of stuff is absolutely we would be supportive of.
Are those other reports going to be done? Can you confirm for them?
Well, I think they would be. I mean, to be honest, until we got into the 3-hour plus conversation about it, I don't know how. My thinking on those reports is that they would be done when required under the city's normal process anyway, because ultimately they would be required. So it's just, would they, on something like that, to be candid with you, I think it's almost a little belt and suspenders, because the city process already requires it at some point. But if it makes everyone kind of feel better that there's a hard look given to those things, I don't have any issue with it. But hopefully that's somewhat helpful.
Madam Chair, may I be recognized?
No, sir, you may not. Not at this time. I'm sorry. Okay, so what's the board's pleasure at this point? Dr. Carrera, do you have something else you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to raise some issues that I heard. So height is something that is not in our staff as a condition. So if you heard that the applicant is okay with that, but if you could like to include that as a condition, the height. The other thing that I think, the hours of operation, no trucks after certain hours, I think that would be a compromise as well. And maybe colors to the elevations, or no fenestration up to the rear of the property, so that there is no privacy issues to the neighborhood to the east. Since this is a storage, I mean, we have fenestration requirements, but I think we could try to work with the applicant to have different articulations on that facade and not a fenestration, so that they are protected on the privacy. So these are the issues that can be discussed to alleviate some of the concerns of the community.
Do we have to clearly enumerate those in the motion, or can it be a
You can
generic of, with, discussion of staff before the council meeting? I mean, we've got a month before they're going to meet on this. Can we say it pending? I don't know what we use the
You
word
can
pending,
put those
but
conditions in your motion, yeah.
we'd have to list them clearly right now what we want changed.
Yeah, but I mean, do you not have them all? I mean, is there other?
I think I'd have a difficulty trying to.
The wetlands, and just like the wetland issue, I mean, it's not going to be something that we will approve. we have comprehensive plan
I know, I'm just
policies.
thinking here within, in the next 5 to 10 minutes, trying to make a motion and list exactly what it is we want done is just going to be kind of a foolish expedition, because I don't think we could do it justice by getting it that quickly. That's why I was looking for something more general of, to put that stuff together before it goes to council.
Okay.
So I don't really have anything here.
So those 5, are you objecting to any of those? There was 5 suggested?
I don't know. There's probably more in here.
I-
Other things I've said all night, but I mean.
The hours of operation,
But if you're asking me
colors, the windows, and what was the 5th? Hours of operation.
I don't think there's any level of negotiation we're going to find between the applicant and the community. I don't think they care if it's open. I mean, they definitely don't want it 24 hours. They just don't want a storage building. And
I'm just trying to think.
no, I'll get in trouble. That wasn't my fault. But so that's what I'm saying. It's like I don't think we can carve out anything that's going to make them happy.
I'm just trying to think of something to give to council, because what we're going to do now at this point, since we voted against the denial, is we have to give something to council for them to look at and say, this is why, and this is the concerns we had.
I think we should give them a denial.
I can write those all out in a
you
motion,
can-
so clearly labeled for us to vote on, which is why I'm again trying to get to the point of either just send a motion to approve, let them figure it out, let them watch this and hear everything we said, and let them figure out what it is we wanted changed, and let staff figure that out in the next month.
They can always add to it. It's going to happen in a public hearing again.
And on that same argument, so I said I don't feel like.
Right, but I think what my point is, I mean, maybe we can just say approve, that's our recommendation, moving on. Staff knows our concerns at this point, and in the month before that council meets, they can try to put something else together and fix these changes along with the applicant that's heard this. He seems agreeable to say, take the concerns here and try to work with it and figure it out. If they can't, and it goes to council and they're still on the same page wanting to deny it, let them do it. If they feel confident that that's what it is, that they're technically the ruling authority here, we're just the recommend.
So, Mr. Minton, would you be comfortable?
So, I'm just going to put the motion to recommend approval with no provisions.
With no.
As staff presented.
With no conditions added.
Just like council did.
Okay, so that's the motion before us. Is there a second? No second? Motion dies for lack of a second. Okay, so we're back to square one. So the things that the board can do is recommend, send a recommendation to council to approve with revisions, or to deny. And so far we've tried denial and approval.
Can I try denial again? Sorry.
Please be quiet.
Madam Chair.
This isn't helping.
Madam Chair, may I try denial again?
Mr. Pollock, if you want to make another motion, you can.
Without having to state everything I said before, can I just renew my motion for denial?
Just make
No.
the motion we discuss after that, so.
Okay, then I'm
You have
gonna.
to state the.
I'm going to make a motion to deny Resolution 368019, special exception use order for Black Hammock storage, for lack of, well, for what I feel, for violation, what's the words? Not meeting LDC section 3.3D2, subsection A, subsection C, subsection D, and where's the wetland one?
It was under A.
It's in there.
All right, I got A, I got C.
Wetlands under A.
Where does wetland?
Wetlands under A.
Oh, okay, so then A, C, and D.
A, C, and D?
Yeah, A for the land use compatibility, C for the proper use of mitigative techniques, and D for hazardous waste. That's it.
Okay. Okay, so the motion before us then is to recommend denial for the application not meeting the land use compatibility, mitigative techniques, and hazardous waste. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Gashlin, thank you. Is there any discussion?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Pollack?
I know it's ridiculous to make the same motion that didn't pass approval first time. But the thing is, and this is how I feel about this one, City Council does get a second bite at the apple. The applicant gets a second bite at the apple, and the community gets a second bite of the apple. They can take the guidance or the feedback they've received from tonight. They can prepare their cases, and then they can have another shot to really litigate this. That's not the right word. To really discuss it with one another. I don't think right now where we sit as a recommended body, we can carve out what we think the community will agree with and what the applicant will agree. I mean, that's outside of what I think we should be doing. We've heard from everybody that lives around this proposed project, and they're opposed to it. We've heard from the applicant, they want it. But I don't have enough evidence that I feel I have to say, yeah, let's do it right away, and clearly we didn't get a second, so I don't think anybody agrees that we should, yes, let's just do this the way it's recommended. And at the same time, I don't think any of us want to sit here and try to guess what the people who have to live with this want to negotiate. And so that's why I feel like at this point to deny it, let it go to City Council, let them bring their arguments in front of City Council, who has final approval anyway, and get them take some time to really build this. We're not doing the applicant any favor by continuing anything, and we're not doing the public any favor by disregarding their concerns. So I think we should deny this and let the City Council decide.
I'm sorry. Please refrain from clapping. Okay, so that's the motion, and we have a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the vote on the motion to deny. All those in favor of the motion to deny, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
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 Oh, jeez.
Motion fails.
Yeah, but
Okay.
they need to take.
Madam Chair,
Ms. Swellen.
I have a motion to approve with the following exceptions.
Okay.
I have a motion to approve with the minimum of a type C2 buffer, as you spoke about earlier today, on the north, east, and south side of the property.
On which sides?
The north, the east, and the south side of the property, with the potential for a hard barrier structure such as a wall along there to prevent people being able to move in and out of the conservation areas.
And is that hard barrier on all three walls? Is that what
On all three
on
sides
all three
as well.
sides?
A building maximum height of 30 feet, and the operating hours from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m.
You said max height of 30 feet?
Yes.
And operating hours 7 a.m. to
9 p.m.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Minton. Okay, is there any discussion on the motion to approve with conditions?
You made the motion, you get to go first.
Those are my thoughts.
Okay.
Okay, well then my question, I mean, you said, the reason I clarified the 30, because the applicant had recommended 35, so.
I know, I'm saying let's keep
Okay.
it shorter than the homes.
I just want to make
Yeah.
sure, okay?
Yep.
That-
Is there any other discussion?
Madam Chair, I have a question, and I don't know if I have to ask the attorney or whoever. If this body recommends approval with those conditions, I know City Council can accept it, deny, they don't have, they're not binded. Nothing we do here binds them, I get that.
Correct.
But does it create another level, another hurdle?
No.
So if the community were to come up with competent, substantial evidence at the City Council meeting on this matter, scheduled for January, if they were to bring an expert with them or something, that actually did create a rebuttal, that did rebut the presumption, the decision that we make as a board tonight, that doesn't create another presumption that they must rebut, right? Now we're still just getting,
No, they have their own independent.
de novo, essentially?
Correct. They have their own independent hearing.
Okay.
and then they'll take your recommendation into consideration as part of it.
What level, what kind of evidence is that? Is it just, well, you know, it's like, so that we had the lay evidence, the argumental evidence?
Yeah, it's just one of the factors. It doesn't have any more weight.
Probative value than anything.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. My discussion is I've said enough tonight.
Do you wish to weigh in on?
But, and this is what I struggle with. I do understand and I really appreciate the time that staff took, the city attorney and this board, in humoring me on all of this. But like as you and I discussed before this meeting started tonight, this is the largest crowd I've ever seen here. I don't know if it's the largest crowd we've had in recent years. So clearly the community, at least the ones who have an interest in this project, they've made their voices heard. The thing is, I know that we have this document and we're supposed to say, okay, this document tells us we have no choice. But I feel like they're telling us we do. And I feel like these people and people in general are sick of hearing, you know, coming, giving us their opinions, and then being told there's nothing we can do. I feel like...
We'll have quiet in the room, please.
So what I'm saying is I feel like there has to be something we can do other than find ourselves in these difficult positions that Tommy has mentioned he's struggling with, you know, this is what the staff is recommending. And this is no, the staff has worked their butt off on this. I know it because I've talked to them. They're trying to do their job. Everybody here is trying to do their job. But we're all faced with this impossible decision about splitting the baby. And, you know, this is our community, and this is their community, and I just feel like we need to have a better answer for people other than sorry. And I feel like by recommending this, even with the conditions, what we're telling them is, hey, we hear you, we're going to recommend these conditions, but we're doing it anyway. I just don't know how we can do that. And I know the law says we can, but like Tommy mentioned, the morality says we can. And if these are the people who have to sit next to the storage unit and they're saying they don't want it, that has to count for something. And for me, that accounts to a no. And, you know, that may get us sued, as I hope that doesn't happen.
Sure.
But what I'm saying is, then maybe that's a fight we need to take on behalf of these people. And that's my position on this.
Okay. Is there any other discussion? You know, we are limited in what we can consider since it has to be competent, substantial evidence. And this is a motion that I would vote to go along with. If there's no further discussion, we'll call the vote on the motion.
Just one thing on that, the terminology of it.
I'm sorry, Mr. Pollack, what?
Sorry, but I feel like my neighbors are competent and substantial. And so I think it may not be the legal standard, but I think it's the right one. And, you know, that's all I have to say.
Okay, the motion before us is to approve with the conditions of the type C2 buffer on the northeast and south with a potential for a hard barrier in the buffer, maximum height of 30 feet, and operating hours of 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Heck no.
I think we have three ayes and 2 nays.
One heck nay.
So motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan, and thank you all of you for coming out tonight to speak to us.
Before everybody goes,
This meeting is still in order. Please, I'm sorry. We're still having a meeting. It has not been adjourned. Please have your seats or leave. Sorry. We need to...
Okay, the next item on our agenda are discussion items. There are none tonight. I'm sorry, could you please be quiet in the chambers? The next item on the agenda, discussion items, which there are none tonight.
Madam Chair, can I add a discussion item? This has nothing to do with what we just talked about. If you would humor me for a moment. This is my last day on this board. No, it wasn't my choice. City Council didn't agree to let me stay on. But I wanted to thank you for the experience and the opportunity and for putting up with all of my craziness. And so I appreciate it. And I want to thank everybody else for humoring me on this board. I've learned a lot and it's been a pleasure. And I want to thank city staff as well. and the city attorney. You guys have been awesome to me, and thank you for putting up with me. And, you know, I might be gone from this board, but I'm not going away. So thank you.
Along those same lines, this is also my final meeting. As everybody probably heard last night, I requested council not to reappoint me, and tonight's a clear example of why. I can't continue to wrestle with what's morally right versus what we can legally do up here, and this is pretty much a board that has very limited powers at this point, because as we've said numerous times, it really didn't matter what we voted on tonight. Council's going to do whatever they please. I need to spend my time on other endeavors. So, I mean, again, thank you all. It is nothing personal about anybody that's up here. Staff, I mean, you've put up with all my questions and stuff, and I appreciate everything you've done. It's just, it's not my time anymore. So.
Thank you, Mr. Minton. There's no other discussion items or future meeting dates, or December 18th, no meeting. January 1st would be the next one, which is no meeting, so the first meeting of the year will be January 15th, 2019. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We stand adjourned.
Not my choice. My choice. It was Tommy's. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. You as well. Thank you. It's a pleasure serving with you, man. Keep up the good fight, man. Kathy, thank you very much. I appreciate you putting up a lot tonight. I appreciate it. I did my.
It was the big one? It was the real one?
I tried to.
I thought that was the coffee.
I like